Chapter 1. I promise concern for others and a willingness to help those in need, Jeff Taylor said as he stood, hands clasped behind his back, shoulder to shoulder with 28 of Houston's finest. His chest swelled with the words he had committed to memory in anticipation of this very moment more than 10 years before. I promise strength of heart to bear whatever burdens might be placed upon me. He closed his eyes and breathed the words into his soul. This pledge would change his life in ways he could hardly even imagine at the moment. Where would it lead? Up flights of steps as others fled the other direction? Into the mouth of hell to pluck a single life back? Those images from the future, coupled with the words, making it difficult to so much as breathe them. And yet, somehow, his voice managed far more than that. Strong, with a strength he had gained and a strength he would have to find in himself to do this job, his voice came, a solemn vow to all those his life would touch. I promise to protect and serve to the best of my ability. I promise the wisdom to lead, the compassion to comfort, and the love to serve unselfishly whenever I am called. A moment of silence for them all to breathe, one more moment affording a final opportunity to turn back. But like the image of those steps, he knew he never would. If someone needed him, Jeff Taylor, now standing at the door to his destiny, was ready and willing to help. I said I needed those reports by 2. What, were you hoping my desk would blow up and I wouldn't notice they weren't here? Lisa Matheson asked in fury as the phone shook in her hand. I don't need excuses. I am tired of excuses. I want them here in 5 minutes, or you can pack your things and I'll find someone who can actually do this job. Without bothering to say goodbye, she slammed the phone down, and her gaze swept the desk stacked a foot high. How was it possible that every single incompetent moron found their way into her office? They were everywhere, and each one had more excuses than the last one did. One carefully manicured set of nails sifted through the files on her desk, but without the latest sales reports, this information was useless. She hit the intercom button. Sherry, did Camden call yet? About 10 minutes ago. He's on his way. Terrific, Lisa breathed as she let go of the intercom button. More bad news. Camden was sure to jump ship the second he figured out her little agency couldn't even get a simple set of sales figures together. She had given her blood, sweat, and tears for the better part of a year to land the Camden Foods account. Now, she had it, and it was going to be gone before she so much as had a shot at really promoting it. It never ceased to amaze her how long it took to build something, and how very quickly it simply crashed down around her. One finger hit the intercom button. When Joel gets here with those reports, send him in. Sure thing. If she could just get organized before the next disaster hit, it would be nice. It would also be nice if she could sweep one hand across her desk and dump all of the problems there into the garbage. With a frustrated sigh, she reached for the folder she had been compiling since that morning, just as Joel not so much walked, but fell into her office. Nice of you to make it, she said icily. She held out a hand for the information in his. It's all there? The last 3 months, he said, nodding. However, when she opened the folder, her gaze fell across the tallies. No, this is last quarter. I've already got this. I need the newest quarter. Yeah, well, the newest quarter isn't over yet, so... No. Lisa lowered her tone as her gaze skewered through him. I need the figures for the newest quarter. Now. Well, you said the quarter. I thought you meant... Her head was really starting to hurt. Do you have the figures for this quarter or not? For last month, Joel hedged as he pushed his black glasses up on his nose. This month isn't. Then get me the figures for last month. But that's not... Get them! Oh, okay, Joel said, and although he looked like he wanted to add another excuse, One more look at her told him a quick exit would be best. "I'll be back." In frustration, Lisa twirled the single strand of auburn brunette hair that framed her face in a perfect arch. "Okay, this isn't so bad. I've got the newest mock-ups. I'll just show him those. I could probably wing the sales figures too if I had to." The intercom beeped. "Haley's online too." "No, no, no," Lisa moaned as she reached for the phone. "I don't have time for this." The phone was at her ear in one motion, and she breathed one quick breath to squelch all of her frustration. "Hey, Haley girl, what's up?" "I just wanted to make sure my maid of honor hasn't forgotten about our little shindig tonight," the sweet voice of Lisa's younger sister said, sounding even sweeter couched in the middle of the most magical month of her life. "No, I didn't forget, but I am a little busy trying to get away in time." "I can come by and get you if you want," Haley said. "Bryn and Chandra are going to meet us there." "I've got my car." "I know, but I also know you're liable to get buried 6 feet deep in that paperwork of yours and forget." "I wouldn't." "Be careful where you go with that statement. This is the same sister who sat at the airport for 6 hours waiting for you when you decided to drive from Dallas that time." Okay, come get me, but I wouldn't have forgotten this." Joel slipped into the room, and Lisa looked up at him, dreading the bad news he was obviously bringing. "Listen, Hal, I've got to go." 6. "Yeah, 6, Lisa replied, feeling the full weight of the duty fall on her shoulders. If she made it that long, life could only go up from there. With that promise, she hung up. Carefully, Joel handed her the folder. "Here they are, and I've got the ones for this month in there too." With her brain going in 7 directions at once, Lisa opened the folder and tried to focus on what she was looking at just as the intercom buzzed. "Mr. Camden is in the conference room," Sherry said. Lovely. Surrounded by the men who had become his best friends over the last 9 months, Jeff stood, drinking punch and laughing about the exploits they had traversed together. Like the time Dustin had fallen backward the first time they put the full gear on him, or when Craig got stuck in the door as he went through the obstacle course, and the time Ramsey slid down the pole holding his boots in one hand and his pants in the other. Ramsey, who was one of the 6 black men in their class, had never been the most organized among them, but down deep he had a heart as big as the Astrodome. In fact, as Jeff looked around at them, it struck him how very different each was from the others, but how well they had fit together despite their differences, or maybe because of them. One strength made up for another's weakness. He only hoped that his new post would work out as well. "Well, gentlemen," Captain Drake clapped Jeff on the back as he stepped up to the group. "It was touch and go there for a while, but you made it." "Yes, sir," they all chorused like a well-rehearsed kindergarten class. "So, what's up next?" "I'm going down to South Houston," Dustin said, speaking up first as he always did. Dustin. Cool, smooth, confident Dustin. The leader, and the one Jeff would miss the most. "I'm headed out to College Station," Ramsey said with a nod. "God help them," Captain Drake said, and they laughed. He looked over to Craig. "I've got 2 apps in, depends who takes me," Craig said with his slow Texas grin. Meticulous Craig, the guy who always had the right gear at the right time. Jeff would have followed Craig into a burning building that was destined to fall at any moment. It wouldn't matter. Craig would be there with the right stuff to keep the whole thing upright until they had accomplished every last component of their mission. "And how about you, Taylor? What are your big plans?" The attention from the group descended on him in a flash, and Jeff ducked, fully comprehending that he was now center stage. "Oh, you know Taylor," Dustin said after a beat. "He's just looking for the station with the best stud calendar." As though the statement needed emphasis, Dustin struck a heroic pose. Instantly, Jeff shook his head even as he buried it into his chest. "Well, that's the only way he's ever going to get any action," Ramsey said with a laugh. Yeah, Lord knows he's never going to actually ask anybody out, Craig said, joining in on the ribbing session that had been going on for more than 6 months. Somehow, Jeff knew he never should have admitted he wasn't exactly an expert in the area of women. The other 3, 2 married and 1 constantly on the prowl, made women seem like a subject with the difficulty of 3rd-grade reading. However, when they taught the lessons the other guys had obviously learned, he must have been absent, because as far as Jeff could tell, he was clueless on the subject. It wasn't totally his fault. It was something about how he was wired. Around the guys, it was hard enough to get a few words in, but bring a woman around, and the already errant signals from his brain to his mouth became downright unintelligible. Captain Drake laughed with the others and patted Jeff on the back. Well, if you need a good reference. He needs more than that, Ramsey said, and they all burst out laughing again. Thanks, Captain. Jeff extended his hand, trying to be oblivious to the joke. It's been an honor, sir. Good luck, Taylor, the captain said, and his smile spoke in terms of, I hope to see you again someday, and take care of yourself out there. Then the captain moved on to the next cluster of graduates. Hey, this punch is nice and all, Ramsey said, spinning his little cup, but I'm thinking we really deserve a better send-off than this. What do you have in mind? Dustin asked as he took a drink of the punch. The Bar Houston? Ramsey said quizzically. He jerked his head over to the table where the wives sat. You can even bring them along if you want. Craig laughed. How generous of you. I try. Ramsey shrugged and downed the last of his punch. Even though I seriously hate the thought of diluting the opportunity pool. Know what I'm saying? So, you going to let my man Jeff come along too? Dustin asked, draping an arm over Jeff's shoulders. Why not? Ramsey said with a knowing smirk. You've got to actually talk for the prospects to notice you're in the hunt. I don't know. Jeff shrunk away from the thought. I'm kind of busy. What, polishing your boots? Ramsey taunted. It was too close to the truth to deny too vehemently, and Jeff scratched the back of his ear, wishing he could just disappear and be done with it. It's been a long day. And what better way to relieve a long day than a little one-on-one time with some very lovely ladies? Dustin asked. Then he looked at Jeff. Oh, yeah, I forgot who I'm talking to. They laughed as annoyance landed squarely on Jeff's chest. Fine, let's go. I knew it! Lisa jumped at the sound of her sister's voice suddenly in the middle of her office. However, she kept her gaze solely on the campaign spread across her desk. Knew what? You aren't ready yet. Haley crossed her arms in irritation. I am. Head down, Lisa wrote out the rest of her idea. I was just waiting on you. Uh-huh, and I didn't see you downstairs. I figured you'd come up and get me. Okay, so I'm here. Lisa's gaze never lifted from the drawings. You know, Hal, the whole bar thing really isn't my scene. Yeah, Haley said as she walked around the desk where she laced her arm through her sister's and tugged on her. And if I'd let you, you'd hole up here forever and never go anywhere. Quickly, Lisa made one more mark before she allowed herself to be pulled up. And that would be a bad thing? Come on, Bryn and Chandra are waiting. Now this is a party, Dustin said as he draped one arm over the shoulders of his wife Eve, a lovely brunette who huddled in closer to him. Oh, I just hope the babysitter doesn't charge overtime, Craig's wife Bridget said, looking at her watch. Hey, Ramsey said with a definite scowl. Now, you ladies know I love you, but come on, babysitters, you're cramping my style. And what style would that be, RJ? Eve asked teasingly. You know. Ramsey slid out of the booth and did a smooth slide past the table. My style. Eve ran her hand down Dustin's chest. I'm just glad he didn't rub off on you while you were cooped up in that training thing with him. Lovingly, Dustin turned to her and rubbed the tip of her nose with his. Me too. Yeah. While the two of you are getting all lovey-dovey on us, I'm going to go find myself a little action, Ramsay said. There's plenty of action right here for me, Dustin said, and as Jeff watched them from across the table, his hand on his cold Bud Light, he couldn't help but think that in the whole general scheme of things, he'd rather be where Dustin and Eve now sat than where Ramsay stood. I'm telling you, you're missing out, Ramsay said, shaking his head. You know, for someone who wants action so bad, you sure don't move very fast, Craig said from his position next to Bridget. You just take notes, Hyatt. Pointing both forefingers at the group as he slid backward, Ramsay arched an eyebrow and disappeared into the crowd. I'm sure glad I don't have to do that anymore. Eve slid so close to Dustin that Jeff wondered how she didn't just disappear. This is so much better. Enjoy it, Bridget, who wasn't huddled nearly so close to her husband, said. You get a couple of kids, and you'll never get to be that close again. Craig laughed. Yeah, it's family night every night of the week. Coiling her neck, Eve looked up at Dustin. Let's not ever have kids. Ah, he said, smiling down at her. I think making them sounds like fun. Oh, yeah, she said, as a fire lit in her eyes. Now, that does sound like fun. Hey, hello. What are we going to have to do? Hose you two down? Craig asked. Well, considering you've got a hot babe sitting right next to you, I don't think I'd be so concerned with us, Dustin said, smirking. You know, Craig said as he turned to Bridget, the man has a point. Do you remember how to dance, Mrs. Hyatt? Instantly, she smiled. I thought you'd never ask. Together, they slid from the booth. That doesn't sound like a half-bad idea, Eve said, tracing a finger around and around on Dustin's chest. Well, then what are we waiting for? Dustin asked, and they slid out the other way. Just before they stepped from the table, Dustin turned back to the lone table occupant. Hold our seats. Offhandedly, Jeff saluted with 2 fingers. Somehow, he wished he had just stayed home to polish his boots. Good grief, Lisa girl, you've really got to get out of that office more. Bryn, one of the other bridesmaids, tipped up the beer in her hand. What makes you say that? Lisa asked, trying not to squirm defensively. Her own bottle of beer sat on the table without so much as a sip taken out of it. Look at you, Chandra frowned. You look like you just stepped off the cover of Working Women today. You really should learn to let your hair down a little, Bryn confirmed. Lisa's hand went to the back of the upsweep of hair. I didn't have time to change before Haley dragged me out here. Okay, I heard my name, Haley said, slipping up to the booth. So what? Are we going to sit here all night and drink? Or did we come to enjoy ourselves a little? Haley was moving to the beat of the pounding music, like she was born in a dance club. Well, let's go dance already, Bryn said, pushing Haley out in front of her. Chandra slid out the other way and then stopped. Lise, aren't you coming? No, I think I'll just hold the table, Lisa said, waving them away. With a shrug, Chandra followed the other 2 out into the crowd, swaying with every step she took. As soon as they were gone, Lisa relaxed into the soft plastic of the booth as her finger played with the ice on her beer. Haley. She was here because of Haley. Just remember that. Put a smile on your face and get through this. Hi, a tall guy in a t-shirt and a baseball cap suddenly said, standing in front of her table. I saw you sitting over here by yourself. I was wondering if you'd like to dance. The relaxation snapped right out of her spine as she sat straight up. Oh, no. No thanks. I'm not really into dancing. You sure? He flashed that false smile she'd seen so many times it sickened her now. I'd hate for you to just be left over here all by yourself. No, she said, trying to smile, but the effort hurt her face. Maybe later. He held out his palms in surrender. "Your loss," and he moved on through the crowd. Wishing she could just disappear, Lisa laid her elbow on the seat back behind her and put her fingertips to her forehead. This was pointless, utterly pointless. The whole idea of bars was to go and meet people and have fun. But she didn't want to meet anyone, and the last thing she had time for was fun. In frustration, she let her arm fall forward where it immediately met up with a brick mildly resembling an arm. "Oh!" Instantly, she sat up as she looked across the booth back at the target she had surprise attacked. "I'm sorry." Her eyes widened as the guy sitting there yanked his arm away. "Oh, no, it wasn't you," he said with a visible swallow. "It was me. I wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry." "It's okay," she said, as her senses took in the strong yet quiet features, the black hair clipped neatly over his ears, and the gentleness of his blue eyes. She was sure she must be dreaming, and then he smiled, and she knew that in fact she was. In utter self-defense, she turned back to her table, holding the part of her arm that was now burning from that one single solitary brush with his. She could feel his gaze still on her, and quickly, if for no other reason than to quench the fire in her chest, she took a long drink of the ice-cold beer. When she set the bottle down, she wasn't sure if the headache she suddenly had was from the music, or the beer, or the fact that her eyes were trying desperately to move to the side of her head to get another look at him. "Come on, Lisa, get a hold of yourself," she breathed. "He's just like all the rest of them. Snap out of it." The girls picked that moment to conga line up to her table, with what looked like half the bar following them. "Come on, Lise!" Haley yelled, dancing and laughing and pulling her sister out of the booth. "Have some fun!" "Look at you, sitting here all alone," Bridget said as she and Craig followed the conga line back to the table and sat down. The pity in her eyes made Jeff's head fall of its own accord. Softly, Bridget laid a hand on his arm. "We've really got to find you someone, Jeffrey. You're making my heart hurt." Sheepishly, he scratched the back of his neck. "It's not so bad." He laid his arm over the booth back behind her, and his gaze followed it to the now empty table beyond. But he shook the sight of the angel ghost away from his consciousness. "I'm just glad you guys are having fun." "But you're not having any," Bridget said, frowning. Then she brightened. "How about you dance with me?" Dance? Every awkward part of his body stood to attention. "Oh, I don't think—" However, she already had his other hand in hers. "That wasn't a question. You don't mind, do you, Craig?" Craig smiled at them as Bridget pulled Jeff out of the booth. "Just bring her back, okay?" Every step was torture for Jeff, all the way to the dance floor. There were things in life that he did well. Dancing was not one of them. On the floor, he tried to find the beat, but it kept moving on him. Side to side, not really dancing so much as just moving, he swayed. How did all the other guys make this look normal? It felt utterly foreign to every inch of his body. At that moment, he caught sight of Dustin and Eve slow dancing, although the beat was more of a jungle rhythm. He couldn't even dance the way you were supposed to with music like this, and he sure couldn't pull something like that off. No, for all intents and purposes, he was doomed to forever be the awkward one, to forever be the one that the world overlooked. But that was okay. He didn't need the spotlight. One true love. If he could just find that, the rest of life would be perfect. As he glanced again at Dustin and Eve, that was his one and only wish. Lisa's head was swimming by the time they made it back to the table, and in seconds a waitress appeared with a round of shots. "Oh no," Lisa waved her hands in front of her. "None for me, thanks." "Come on, Lise," Haley said, laughing and begging at the same time. "Just one." It wasn't a good idea. She knew it. "Okay, one." The glasses were filled and Chandra raised hers. To Corey, who dang sure better know how lucky he is to be getting Haley. Here, here. In one motion, the other three downed their drinks as Lisa looked at hers, knowing how awful this was going to be. She squinted into the oncoming drink, counted to 3, and nearly choked when the sharp, stinging liquid assaulted her throat. "More dancing," Haley announced, jumping to her feet. The other two followed without question, but Lisa slunk back behind the table so they wouldn't notice her absence. When they were gone, she sat up and coughed again. Peeling her eyes from the back of her eyelids, she shook her head. Work was not going to be fun tomorrow. "No, no, no," the arm guy from earlier said, sliding into the other booth as he pushed the other two occupants back out to the floor. "That's enough for me. You two go, dance, have fun." Laughing at him, the guy put his arm on the lady's waist, and they disappeared into the crowd. For one moment, Lisa folded the edge of her napkin up and then down, fighting not to look over at him. It was crazy. He was just a guy at a bar, one of thousands. And yet... Without her permission, her gaze chanced across the divide between them, and the jolt from the pools of blue looking back at her sent her diving back to her side. He was looking at her. That wasn't good. No, no. That was not good. Her face went hot. Now he was going to think she was looking at him. Well, she was, but not because she wanted to. She really couldn't help herself. After all, where else are you supposed to look? At the table all night? But still, she shouldn't have been looking. That might be an invitation, and she didn't want to be sending out any invitations. Not tonight. Not ever. Slowly, carefully, she wound the strand of hair sliding down her face over her ear. One more furtive glance over the divide between them. This time, she was thankful to find only his silhouette. Good. At least he wasn't going to think she was trying to make eye contact or something. Casually, she sat up, nodding to herself as she closed her eyes. Her brain coached itself on what to do and what not to do. However, when she opened her eyes, the fact that his arm was again only a foot from her jumped into her consciousness. Nervously, half her gaze followed the sculptured forearm up past the black sleeve that covered everything from his elbow up to his shoulder. She shut her eyes, trying to block him out, but the second she opened them, he was back. However, this time, the blue pools were back too. Her gaze locked with his, and she knew, he knew, she was looking. Quickly she smiled as she wound the errant hair around her ear. "Nice music," she said. "Yeah." His smile was better than she had remembered. She wanted to say something else, but her brain was scrambled by the proximity of his arm and the disarming way his gaze fell to the table, as if her eyes were too intense to hold on. "You come here a lot?" she asked, wholly reprimanding herself for pursuing when she should be thankful he wasn't. "No, not really." He shook his head and shifted a little, and this time his smile was less sure. "We're celebrating." "Oh, really? Us too?" With her tone, she tried to coax his full gaze back to her, although she was only mildly successful. "My little sister's getting married next weekend." "Oh." This smile was stronger. "Lucky her." "Yeah, lucky me, too." Lisa shook her head and wrinkled her nose. "Bachelorette party. Woohoo!" This time he laughed outright. "Sounds terrible." "Well, as long as they don't drag me out there, it's not so bad." He nodded. "I hear you there." For a moment she sat, gathering her scattering sanity and trying to get her gaze not to notice the gold cross shining atop the solid black shirt at his neck. "So what are you celebrating?" However, at that moment, her attention snapped to the other edge of his table where two of his friends slid into the booth with him, without pretense. "Man, it's hot out there," the girl with the nearly black, wavy hair said, fanning herself with her hand as Lisa self-consciously slunk back into her own world. "Yeah, I'm sure it's the dance floor," Elbow Guy said with a laugh as he retreated back to his own table. "Hey, how would you know?" the guy in the skin-hugging brown gold pullover shirt asked. "It's not like you can tell from way over here." He took a drink. "Man, have you seen Ramsey? That guy's insane. He's got like a whole bachelorette party dancing with him." Lisa's ears tried to peel themselves from the conversation as she slid farther down into the booth. "Yeah, well, dancing isn't everything," Elbow Guy said as he laid his forearm on the booth back, causing the remaining sanity in Lisa's head to disperse. Lunacy. It was the far side of it. However, the alcohol or something had a hold of her, because Lisa's brain took a nice little journey to the middle of that hot dance floor with her in his arms, swaying in time with only one another. A low growl of disgust with herself crawled into her gut. Where was her willpower? He was a guy, after all. A guy! And that meant only one thing. Trouble. "Lisa girl, what are you doing sitting over here all by yourself?" Haley asked as she, Bryn, Chandra, and a tall, well-built black man danced up to the table. He had his arms around each of the two girls. "We found ourselves a fireman," Bryn said, loud enough for the whole bar to hear. "Hey," the man said, with a glance to the table next to them. "Well, look what we have here." Not one part of Lisa liked the sound of that statement. "Man, you ladies must have some seriously good compass directions going for you. These are the friends I was telling you about." Occupants from both tables looked across in surprise. "Ramsey, what did you do?" Pullover Guy asked, as though he was reprimanding a 2-year-old. "2," Ramsey mouthed over the top of the girls' heads as he nodded and smiled. The darkness under the table was looking very inviting to Lisa at that moment. Pullover Guy waved them over. "Well, what are you standing over there for? Come, join us." "What do you say, ladies? Join us?" Ramsey's clothesline of a grip around Bryn and Chandra made arguing pointless as he led them over to the other table. Instantly, Haley stood to follow. "Come on, Lise." Lisa closed her eyes and exhaled. There was no way this was going to turn out well.
You don't want to miss what comes next. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.
Chapter 2. "We're going to be dancing," Bryn said as she stood under Ramsey's arm next to the table. "So why don't you get in first?" The tips of Lisa's ears flamed, but she didn't want to make a complete scene, so she slid a hand under her straight, light beige skirt and slipped into the booth. Elbow Guy slid all the way around until he was sitting by Pullover Shirt, and in the next instant, Lisa was so close to him, she could feel the heat from his shoulder. Carefully, she wound the strand of hair around her ear as she smiled over at him sheepishly. At that moment, Haley bumped into her and nearly sent her careening right into him. "So, Rams, are you going to introduce us to your friends?" Pullover Shirt Guy asked. "Oh, sure," Ramsey said smoothly. "This is Chandra, and Bryn, and the bride-to-be Haley, and—" His gaze chanced on Lisa and stopped as though he wasn't quite sure where she had come from. "Lisa," she said so quietly it was drowned out by the music. Ramsey nodded, although she was sure he just wanted to get on with the introductions. "And over here we've got Eve and Dustin and Jeff." He looked around as the name wound right into the middle of Lisa. Jeff. Jeff. It was a nice name, ordinary, just like he looked, ordinary in an unbelievably extraordinary way. "Where are Craig and Bridget?" "Dancing, I think," Eve said, looking out to the floor. "Well, then, what are we all sitting here for?" Ramsey asked in annoyance. "Ladies." One by one they slid back out of the booth, and Lisa slid over 2 inches, wishing there was more oxygen in the room. When Haley was out, she looked back. "Lise?" It was a trap. Either way, it was a trap. "I think I'll just stay here." With an annoyed shrug, Haley followed the group into the crowd. A second, and then 2, and suddenly Lisa wished she had followed her sister. "So, a bachelorette party, huh? The guy she was pretty sure was Dustin asked. Yeah, Haley's getting married next week, Lisa said, clearing her throat to get the whole sentence out. Ugh, I remember that, Eve said. Horrible, horrible, horrendous week. She laid a hand on Dustin's, and he looked down at her. I'm glad that's over. What's over? A blonde asked as she slid into the booth next to Lisa, and then she stopped for a second when she realized she didn't know who that was. The wedding, Eve said theatrically, as the guy with the blonde sat down next to her, leaving precious little space between Lisa and Jeff. Why couldn't she even think that name without her heart slamming in her chest? She had to get it together before they all figured out she was an idiot. Oh, the blonde glanced at Lisa with curiosity mixed with confusion. Guys, Dustin said, this is, Lisa, wasn't it? Wishing there was a non-threatening place to put her gaze, Lisa nodded. Instantly, the new guy held his hand across the table. Craig, he said gallantly, and this is my wife, Bridget. Lisa shook the other two hands as her senses wrapped around the fact that although he was inches away from her, Jeff hadn't so much as said a word in 10 minutes. You know, Bridget looked at her watch. We really better be getting home. The babysitter's going to fire us. Wouldn't want that, would we? Eve asked sweetly as she huddled closer to Dustin. You all take care. Craig extended his hand first to Dustin and then to Jeff, and when Jeff extended his hand, Lisa's senses snapped to a full understanding of the size of his forearm. It made at least 2 of hers, and it was 4 shades tanner than hers as well. Then Craig waved at her. It was nice to meet you, Lisa. Yeah, you too, she said, willing Rational to come back to her. Night, the departing two said, and Dustin waved at them. For a moment, the music simply surrounded them, and then Dustin looked down at Eve. You do realize we're wasting good music here. Wouldn't want that now, would we? She replied. Hand in hand, they slipped out, and just before they walked off, Dustin turned and pointed at Jeff. You behave yourself. There wasn't a single inch of space anywhere on Lisa's face that wasn't 57 degrees hotter than it should have been. Slowly, hoping he wouldn't notice, she slid an inch and then another away from him. It wasn't the direction she wanted to go, but for her heart's sake, if nothing else, it was the direction she had to. A moment, and then another, and she was starting to think this would be the longest night of her life. The edge of her finger wrapped around the hair at her temple and pushed it behind her ear as she glanced over at him. He wasn't looking at her. Instead, his gaze was transfixed on the dance floor. So, you never said what it is you're celebrating, she said softly, hoping he might actually talk again. In the next heartbeat, his gaze caught hers, and she saw the apprehension in the depths of his eyes. He smiled, kind of. Oh, we graduated today. Graduated? From what? She laid her temple onto her hand as she looked at him. The Fire Academy, he said, nodding. Fire Academy? Then she understood. Oh, so you're a fireman too. He nodded as the bottom of his lip disappeared under his teeth. All 4 of you? She asked to clarify. Yeah, but after tonight we're kind of going our separate ways, so... She smiled at him with gentle understanding. That's tough. I guess you get pretty close working together like that. The glance over at her held only gratefulness. Yeah. His gaze fell back to the table, and he sat for a moment, lost in thought. It's weird, you know. A year ago I didn't even know them, and now it's like saying goodbye to brothers. Are they, like, leaving for good? Ramsey's going to College Station, and Dustin's going to South Houston. I'm not real sure where Craig will get stationed. Probably somewhere around here, but who knows? The list stopped. She waited, but plans for the 4th person didn't come. What about you? His glance snapped up to her, and then drifted back out to the dance floor. I've got an interview on Monday, downtown. Oh, really? Huh. I work downtown. The shift of subject brought his gaze back to her. "Oh, where do you work?" Instantly, it was her gaze that was running. "Oh, it's just a little office in the Travis Tower." "What do you do there?" She hated this part. I own my own—" She cleared her throat. "I'm in advertising." That sounds cool." Then his face fell in thoughtfulness as he realized where she was headed with her original statement. "You own your own business?" Slowly she nodded, knowing she should look more proud of that fact than she seemed. "Me and 3 employees." She shook her head at that statement. "What?" he asked, zeroing in on her with his gaze, making her brain feel like a jammed intersection. She shook her head. "I don't know. Sometimes I think they are more trouble than they're worth." "Why's that?" "Because I just wish I could do it all on my own. Then things would get done right the first time, and I wouldn't always be running around after everyone, trying to keep things going and redoing everybody's mistakes." They're not trained for that kind of work?" "Oh, they're trained all right, but that doesn't always mean much." He seemed to relax a little. "So what do you come up with? Ads?" "We're supposed to do it all, but we have to farm the TV and radio production out. I don't have time for that. But I draw up a bunch of the stuff we use." "Like what?" There's that billboard over on the East X freeway for zebra carpets. That's mine." "The one with all the stripes in the background that has a zebra in the middle if you look real hard?" Her surprise jumped out. "You've seen it?" He laughed. "Yeah, I drove by that thing like 600 times before I ever saw the dang zebra, and now every time I go by I can't believe I missed it." "Well, it's kind of hard to see when you're going 70. "Unless it's 5 and you're going 2, he said with another laugh. It was a nice laugh, hearty but not booming. "True." She matched his laugh, then shrugged. "Sometimes I wish I could do the stuff I like to do and let somebody else do all the rest." "Then why own your own agency? Why not just get on with someone else?" She felt her face corkscrew. "That'd never work." "Why not?" "Because I'm too much of a solo player. Teams just hold you back." The softness of his gaze drifted across her face, and she felt the surface of it go hot. "Sometimes it's teamwork that makes life interesting." At that moment, Haley slid into the booth beside Lisa and bumped into her shoulder. It was quite clear that her sister was having a very good time. "Man, that Ramsey guy is insane! I think my legs are going to fall off." "That's not good," Lisa said, turning her attention to her sister. "Corey might shoot me if I let something happen to you." Haley waved her off and looked over to Jeff with a sarcastic shake of her head. "Overprotective maid of honor." He smiled at Haley and then trained his gaze back on Lisa. Trying to think of something to do so her head wouldn't spontaneously combust, she looked at her watch. It was nearly 1. "What time are we planning on leaving anyway? It's getting kind of late." "Late?" Haley asked in horror. "It's early." "Not when you've got work tomorrow, it isn't." "Work? Come on, Lise. Is that all you ever think about?" "Well, I'm supposed to pitch that proposal for the Youth Leadership Conference on Monday, and it's not—" Haley put both hands in the air and waved at Lisa to get her to stop. No, I don't want to hear it. You know what? I want to dance some more." And with that, she slipped back out of the booth. "But you're my—" Lisa started, although Haley was already 6 deep into the crowd. "Ride." She sighed and shook her head. Nobody understood. "Looks like you're stranded," Jeff said, and absurdly, there was an apology in his tone. Lisa growled in frustration. "Yeah, looks that way." His fingers played with the fraying edge of the paper on his beer bottle. "Well, if you need a ride, I wouldn't mind." "Oh, no," she said quickly. "That's okay. I'll just stay until they're ready. It's fine." He nodded. "Oh, okay, of course." Through the crowd, Lisa caught sight of Dustin and Eve in a head-to-head, gaze-as-locked dance on the smoky fringes of the dance floor. Looks like your friends are having a good time." He followed her gaze and smiled. "Yeah, those two are always having fun when they're together." "And they're married?" 8 months, he confirmed. "Ah, newlyweds." "In every sense of the word." He laughed. "You think they're bad now? You should have seen them that first month. You'd have thought they were joined at the hip." "They seem like they're really in love." "Yeah, Eve's great, but she always looks a little incomplete without him by her side." Jeff's whole countenance softened as the thoughts behind his eyes floated away on the wings of a dream. "She comes to the station on her lunch break just so they can be together." He shook his head slowly. "And Dustin's always ready to just get done so he can get back home to her. It's like they are determined to spend every single second they possibly can together." Lisa heard the wistfulness in his voice, and she turned her head from the dance floor and laid it on her hand to look at him. "What about you?" Instantly, he looked at her as though he hadn't realized he was having a conversation with anyone other than himself. "What about me?" "You got somebody special in your life? Anyone coming to see you at the fire station?" "My mom came once. Does that count?" She laughed. "It's better than nothing." "Yeah," he said, joining her laugh. "I guess so." Then the smile fell. "It's hard sometimes going out with them. Craig and Bridget are just such a couple, and Dustin and Eve, well..." One of his hands slid down under the table as he straightened from sitting too long in the booth, and he stretched out his jeans. "Ramsey's always got a dozen dates swirling around him, so I get to sit and hold down the table a lot." "Oh," she said, nodding. "So that's what you were doing?" "Yeah." His eyes were a mixture of hesitation and thoughtfulness. "Well, you do a good job of it," she said teasingly, and he looked at her with a question in his eyes. "I mean, look at it." She laid her hands on the tabletop. "It hasn't moved a single inch all night." The hesitation was gone when he smiled at her as she examined the table from top to bottom. "Nope, not a single inch." "Yeah, well, I've had good help," he said, and his voice faded with the words. "Oh, you think so, huh? Well, then it's a good thing they brought us along, or this here table might have just floated right away." Amusement danced through his eyes. "So you've got a presentation Monday?" "Ugh," she said as the lightheartedness collapsed around her. "The Youth Leadership Conference. Don't remind me." "That bad?" "They're wanting to do this whole speaker thing and get all the schools in Houston in on it." "Sounds great," he said, turning as he laid a casual arm over the booth back, looking much more at ease than he had since she'd first touched his arm 2 hours before. "What kind of speakers are they going to have?" "Oh, you know, community leaders, business people, that kind of thing. We're really at the very beginning stages of planning it. It's not supposed to be until the fall, but they want to get going on it now. I'm supposed to have suggestions for speaker names for the meeting on Monday, but at the rate I'm going, I'll be lucky to have them by the time the conference starts." "The speakers?" "Yeah, a long list of Houston's most influential business people, the real top dogs, you know. It's just that I've got this dumb Camden Foods account to worry about because Kurt and Joel can't put a progress report together to save their lives, and we really need to be working on the new campaign for zebra carpets. Once everyone sees the zebra, that one's kind of pointless." She laughed at her own joke, although he didn't seem to catch it. "Man, you must be going in circles." "That's what it feels like." She closed her eyes and sighed. "And then I've got Haley's wedding next weekend, so we've got final fittings this week, and she wants me to go shopping with her for her honeymoon stuff, and then the rehearsal and setting up, and I don't really know when I'm going to find time to do all of this." Like she ran into a solid brick wall, she stopped and surveyed him seriously. "You don't know of a way to get more than 24 hours into a day, do you?" "At the rate you're going, you may need like 75. The laugh that came from her soul felt very good. "You've got a point." Movement at the front of the table pulled their gazes over to where Dustin and Eve stood arm in arm. "Hey, man, I think we're going to call it a night. Dustin said, and Jeff jerked his arm off the back of the booth. So soon? Yeah, we've got to get our stuff boxed up tomorrow. The moving van's going to be there bright and early Monday morning. Oh, you needing some help? Jeff asked, as if he might need to go right then to start boxing things up. Dustin grinned. Hey, I never turn down a good offer of help. What time? 10, 11? Dustin looked at Lisa. Whatever time you can get there. Let's say 11, Jeff said, and Dustin nodded as he extended his hand, and the two of them knocked fists together. See you then. Take care. Dustin stepped away from the table and then turned back. It was nice to meet you, Lisa. Yeah, she said, as embarrassment crowded on her. You too. Night, Dustin said with a final wave. When they were gone, Lisa looked at her watch. 2:00. She shook her head. Good. Now they have to go home. Jeff nodded as he laid his forearms on the table, watching his thumbs bounce back and forth across each other. So you might get some sleep tonight after all. At that moment, the three girls and Ramsey approached the table, and Jeff and Lisa looked up and straightened. Come on, Lise, we're going over to Shane's, Haley said, never really breaking rhythm. You ready? Shane's? Who's Shane? Lisa asked as confusion tinged the anger. Who's Shane? Haley mocked. Shane's, the bar, dummy. Bar? Lisa asked in outright dismay. But Ramsey says it's excellent, Bryn said, looking up at him in awe. But I'm not. Lisa looked at her watch. I really need to get home. The set of Haley's hands on her hips said that Lisa was once again ruining her good time. So what, you just want to bust up the whole party then? Come on, Lise, it's not that late. I could take her, Jeff said from Lisa's side, and Haley shifted her attention to him in the same second that Lisa turned her gaze to him. He shrugged as he looked at her. I could take you. No big deal. Cool, Haley said, accepting for Lisa without so much as consulting her, and instantly Lisa turned and nailed Haley with a "would you shut up" gaze. Haley returned the look with one that said, What? I want to go. Lisa turned back to Jeff. I'd hate to put you out. It's not putting me out. I was headed home anyway. Great, so it's settled then, Haley said, smiling. Great, Lisa breathed, wondering when she had stumbled into this nightmare. At the club door, Jeff grabbed his jacket and half followed, half led Lisa outside. She was as stunning standing up as she was sitting right next to him. With her in that business suit, the slim curve of her waist and the heels, his already scrambling brainwaves were having a hard time keeping up with anything other than her. It felt like walking next to a runway model. As they exited, he swung his denim and brown suede jacket on, sensing how underdressed he looked next to her. So, where's your car? He asked, hoping his voice would hold out long enough to get the sentence out. At the office, she said, and he noticed the protective fold of her arms across her chest. On Travis? She looked over at him, and surprise ran through her eyes. Yeah. In slow lockstep, they walked to his car, the product of 100 million hours spent under a hood and on a hard concrete floor, a 1971 black-on-blue Pontiac GTO convertible. Nice, she breathed, running a hand over the shiny paint job when he led her to the passenger side. You think so? He asked, surprised she had even noticed, and even more surprised she didn't turn up her nose at the thought of riding in anything other than the very newest model. He watched her fold herself onto the off-gray seat, not wholly sure if he should take her hand to help her in, or if that was just something he'd seen in some old movie. It wasn't like he'd had much practice at this, and suddenly he really wished he had. Careful to make sure that she was securely in, he waited one more second and then slammed the door. When he slipped behind the steering wheel, she was still marveling. This is unbelievable. Did you do this yourself? She asked in awe. Me and my dad, he said, not really sure if it was her reaction or the pride he had felt when they had finally finished the project that was filling his chest. Her smile lit the night around him. So, is this like a hobby then? He started the car as his heart raced ahead of him. Somehow, even sitting next to her in the noisy bar hadn't been this intimidating. I don't really have the funds for it to be an ongoing hobby, if that's what you mean. But if you did? I love cars. He glanced over at her and then thought better of that move. Ever since I was like 12, my dad and I would go to all the car shows, classics, muscle cars, concept cars. It was just a trip to see anything with a motor. The lights winked across the windshield as they drove down the neon-lit street. So, why this one? She asked. Well, for one thing, it wasn't in perfect condition, so we got it pretty cheap. It really needed a lot of work, but that was cool too, because we got to go all around searching for ones like it to trade out parts. That was half the fun. And what was the other half? He laughed, driving it once it was finished. She glanced down at the gearshift and wrinkled her nose. I don't know, I'm more of an automatic girl myself. It's not so bad. Expertly he shifted down, once you get used to it anyway. She looked up at the ceiling. So, does the top really go back? Yep, it really does, although I don't do that much anymore. I just about ruined it a few years back. I was at school and left it down. About halfway through a statistics test, it started pouring rain. After that, I left it up, just in case. Her hand glided across the door handle. Smart. For an instant, when he looked over at her, he wished they could simply drive forever. That would be so much easier than finding the words to get enough information so he could see her again. The question of her phone number slipped into his mind as his hand shifted the gears, but he didn't have a paper or a pen. More than that, he didn't have the words to ask. Okay, I guess you're going to have to give me a little better coordinates than just Travis Street. Oh, sorry, she said as her gaze snapped from the car to the street. Yeah, turn right up here at the light. The shimmer of her red fingernail sparkled in the flash of the streetlight over the windshield. It's the third building on the right. There's a parking garage next to it. Okay. He downshifted again and then spun the wheel to guide them into the darkened parking area. I'm on the third level. She settled back into the seat, and when he glanced over at her, he liked how comfortable she looked. At that moment, her gaze chanced across to his, and his heart thudded to a stop. If only there were words. Third level, right? He asked softly. Right. Her gaze jumped from his to her window, and reluctantly he turned the car up the second ramp and into the third level. It's over there, the white Cavalier. It wasn't hard to spot. There were only a few vehicles left on the whole level. Deftly, he spun into a space 2 over from where her car sat overlooking the street below. Once parked, his brain scrambled for what to do next. The previous minutes had all been so easy, but now what to do or what to say evaporated from around him. Something told him to shut the car off because its noise was reverberating across the concrete. However, the second the car died, the silence around them echoed far louder. Well, he said without looking at her, this is it. I guess so, she said, but she didn't move to get out of the car. Suddenly, his brain said, You idiot, she's waiting for you to open her door. Not nearly as smoothly as he would have liked, he got out and ran around the back to her side where he reached for the handle. One click, and she smiled up at him as she slipped out and waited for him to close the door. His senses didn't miss the red fingernail and the slim finger attached to it as together they pushed the edge of her hair behind her ear. She smiled at him again, but nervous now. Well, thanks. No problem. Lest he do what his body was screaming at him to do and reach out and touch her, he jammed his hands into his jacket pockets. After a moment, she looked over at her car and then turned for it, and although it was only a 10-step walk, he followed her, trying to find some way to make this moment last longer than any one had ever lasted before. Thanks for helping me hold the table down. At the door of her car, she turned, and her smile no longer held apprehension. "Thanks for keeping me sane." "My pleasure." The muted noise of the cars on the street below was the only sound as they stood there, neither really looking at the other. Finally, she wound her hair around her ear again as it had somehow become dislodged in the adventure of getting from his car to hers. "I'd better be getting home." One hand produced her keys from some undisclosed place under her suit jacket. She turned, unlocked the door, pulled it open, and then she turned back to him for one more glance. "Take care, okay? And good luck." With that, she slipped into the car as he held the door. "Say something," his brain screamed. "Night." "Not that!" He couldn't even get a real smile on his face as he shut her door. Helpless to get what should have been so easy to say said, he stood there and watched as she started the car. One small step at a time, he backed away, and then with one little wave, she backed out and drove away. At that moment, every mistake he had ever made paled in comparison to that one. The air jammed into the top of Lisa's throat as she guided the little car to the other end of the parking garage to the down ramp. Don't look back, just don't look back. But her heart wanted one more glimpse, and defiantly it swung her gaze up to the mirror. In it, he still stood there in that jacket that made her skin burn like flames as he watched her drive away. "Go back," her heart begged. "Please, we'll never find him again." With a force that felt like it was ripping her soul in half, she refocused her gaze from the mirror to the concrete in front of her. Guys were all the same. It was the way they were wired. Nice looking on the outside, and total jerks on the inside. Sure, he hadn't tried to maul her like most of them did, but that was only a matter of time, and if she had the resolve to simply drive away, the amount of time he had to disappoint her would vanish just like he would from her mirror. As she turned first one corner and then the next, it all seemed so easy. Just leave him behind and he would be gone. However, long after she was home and in bed, the will to deny that that last glance was destined to stay with her forever vanished as well. He would be in her heart forever, and she knew in every part of her that the what-ifs dogging her mind would never really fade away.
Never miss a second of the story. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel today.
Chapter 3. "So, what time did you finally make it home last night?" Dustin asked as he and Jeff sat on crates in Dustin's kitchen, carefully wrapping plates in newspaper. Jeff shrugged. 3 or so? Dustin's eyebrows arched. 3 or so? That could be good. So, how was... Lisa, Jeff supplied, although just saying the name knifed through his heart. She was good-looking. Yeah. They rapped and then rapped again. After a few seconds, Dustin looked at his friend. So? So what? In exasperation, Dustin sighed. So what happened? There were a myriad of reasons that Jeff didn't want to divulge the whole story, and he wasn't at all sure which one was the most relevant. I took her to her car. The newspaper in Dustin's hand crunched. No kidding. Cool. Yeah, well, except that I didn't exactly get her number or anything. A scowl dropped onto Dustin's features. You didn't? Why not? Because I was an idiot, Jeff shrugged. I don't know if she would have given it to me anyway. So you didn't even ask? Slowly, Dustin shook his head as Eve strode through the kitchen and ran her hand over the broad expanse of her husband's shoulders. You're never going to believe this one. What's that? She asked, spinning her long hair over her shoulder as she turned. Romeo here didn't get her number. Eve dropped her gaze on Jeff. What? Why not? He didn't think she would give it to him, Dustin said, filling in all the blanks so Jeff wouldn't have to. That's great, huh? But you talked to her, right? Eve asked, completely into the conversation. Jeff stumbled on that one. Well, yeah. So, then you've got to know something about her. Where she lives, where she works. She owns her own business, an ad agency in the Travis Tower. Well, hallelujah, Dustin said with relief. At least you've got a little bit of a lead. Focusing his attention on the newspaper and trying not to drop the plate, Jeff shrugged. Yeah, but what am I going to do? Knock on every office door in the building until I find her? If that's what it takes, yes, Dustin said. For Pete's sake, Jeff, I've known you for what, almost a year now? And she's the first girl I've seen you so much as get a high out while she was around. Well, yeah, but it's not like she really wanted to be there with me. We were just kind of prisoners of the situation. Gee, thanks, Dustin said. You know what I mean. Yeah, but I'm not blind either. I saw how you were looking at her. A small light sparked in the middle of Dustin's eyes as he reached over to Eve and ran a hand down her arm. It's the same way I look at my baby. Eve's eyes went soft as she looked down at him, and Jeff's heart turned over. With one tug, Eve sat on Dustin's lap, and an anvil of envy dropped into the pit of Jeff's gut. If he just hadn't been so stupid. You know, if you two keep that up, the movers are going to get to box this stuff up themselves. With the tip of her nose, Eve rubbed across Dustin's, and Jeff could tell he could have been a wall decoration for as much as they knew he was in the room. Then Dustin looked over at him, past the fall of wavy black hair that Eve trailed behind her as she laid her head on her husband's shoulder. Find her office, Dustin said seriously. Trust me, it's worth it. I didn't say midnight. I said Navy, Lisa said as she slung the ad board mock-up to the desk in frustration. No, no, no. She fought to collect herself as Kurt shifted feet on the other side of her desk. Look, just pull up the color schemes on your computer. Her hand clicked the mouse. It's the one on Mountain, not the one on Lilac. She handed the ad board back, and Kurt started to leave. I need that back in 10. He nodded, and his stringy brown-blonde chin-length bob bounced with his head. As his bland-colored, baggy-clothed body exited her doorway, she laid her head on the desk in utter exasperation. Nothing was going right today. Nothing. Exhausted, she wound her wrist around so she could look at her watch as she blew the piece of hair that had fallen across her eyes up. 47 hours, 16 minutes, and counting until her meeting Monday with Cordell. The illusion that she could do this was evaporating before her eyes. Forcing her head up to the crook of her hand, she snapped the mouse across the screen in aggravation. It would help if her head would quit pounding. She turned and started to type as she blew that straggly piece of hair back out of her eyes. Okay, think, she coached. This isn't that hard. You've done this before. Think, Lisa. Great. What would be great? Youth leaders for the road we can't even see yet flowed onto the little rectangle on her computer from her fingertips. Too long. A click to change the font, and she tried again. Making the leaders of tomorrow. Boring, boring, boring. Ugh, this is nuts. Boss, Sherry said as she ducked into the office hesitantly. Yeah? I've got that plaything tonight for Paige. Remember, I told you about it last week? None of her ideas were getting any better. So I was just going to take off now, if that's okay. Lisa looked up at her in confusion, and then the words actually got through the frustration and into her brain. Oh, yeah, she waved the secretary out. Go, go. Great, thanks. I'll see you Monday. Yeah, Monday. Her attention never really lifted from the screen. Minutes after Sherry had disappeared from the front office, a thought suddenly hit Lisa and she jumped up. Hey, Sherry? However, when she made it to the outer office, there was no Sherry. Okay, so I'll just find it myself. She went over to the filing cabinet and opened the first drawer she came to. Not that one, no. A little harder than it needed to be, she slammed that drawer, causing the pictures and knickknacks on the top of the cabinet to dance. She grabbed the next drawer, but didn't get the latch pushed far enough when she tugged. "Oh, come on." She tried again, and this time the drawer slid open. Her gaze bounced across the tabs. "Okay, here's something that could work." "I've got this," Kurt said from behind her. She turned and nodded. "Put it on my desk." Without really watching him, she looked through the folder in her hands. Finally, something she could use. "I'm going to get on out of here," Kurt said. "I've got a date." "Okay," Lisa said without really looking up, and before she did, he was gone. For good measure, she grabbed the other 2 folders associated with the one in her hand and walked into her office, reading all 3 simultaneously with each step. At her desk, she sat down and pulled forward. That's when she saw the brochure meted out in one solid sheet of periwinkle. "I said Navy!" she screamed to the empty room, slamming the folders down onto her desk. Furiously, she jumped to her feet and very nearly twisted her ankle on the little spot in the carpet that was a little softer than all the others. She yanked the door open. "Kurt!" But the call was met with only silence. As usual, she was all alone in this sinking boat. The distinct feeling of a total life shift descended on Jeff as he stood at the door of the fire station on Bagby Street Monday morning. If the others could do this, so could he. It was the only thought keeping him from running. With a small push, he entered the station and glanced around. The trucks, red and shiny silver, brought a smile to his face. Yes, he could do this. 2 young men, one Hispanic, the other too grimy to really tell, walked into the large open room. "Hayes said change the oil, not wear it," the Hispanic man said, laughing. "Well, if you would have been helping me like you said," the other man started, but stopped when he saw Jeff standing there. Quickly, he wiped some of the grime from his hand and extended it. "Hi, can we help you?" "I'm here to see Captain Hayes," Jeff said, pushing every bit of confidence he had to the surface as he shook the man's hand. The man who had shaken his hand pointed up the metal mesh stairs to one side by the wall. "Up top." "Thanks," Jeff said with a nod. "We're going to need the pressure hose to get you cleaned up," the Hispanic man said as Jeff mounted the first 3 steps. "Oh yeah? I'd like to see you try," the other man shot back, and Jeff laughed. At the top of the staircase, he met up with a door marked simply Captain. A knock, and then a louder one, and he heard the voice from the other side. "Come in." It seemed to take all of his strength to open that door, and once he did, he looked inside, fighting the urge to run. "Captain Hayes?" The man sitting in the chair behind the desk looked more like a statue than a person. He looked up as Jeff entered, and never really meeting his gaze, Jeff stepped over to the desk and extended his hand. "Jeff Taylor, sir. We had an appointment." "Of course, Taylor. Please, have a seat. You're here about the opening." "Yes, sir," Jeff said, wishing his head would quit nodding. "I am." "This is all very nice," Burke Cordell said, laying an old, withered hand across the paperwork Lisa had carefully laid out for him. "But I've been thinking about doing something a little different with this thing." "Different, sir?" Lisa cleared her throat. What did you have in mind?" "Well, what I'd really like is more of a cooperative effort. I mean, we've had these kinds of conferences before, and only the students who are the go-getters come. Then we put up speakers from the various local business firms, and it gets to be more of a recruiting merry-go-round than really teaching anyone anything about leadership." Feeling like he was attacking every idea she had just put forth, Lisa curled her fingers around the folders in front of her. "I was under the impression that business leaders were what you had in mind." "It was." The old man's face fell in thought. "But I've been thinking about it, and every conference is for the same 2% of the kids. What about the other 98%? How do they determine their roads in life? Why can't we give them some options too?" "Yes, sir," Lisa said, faltering for a second. "But this is a leadership conference. Aren't the leaders supposed to be the top 2%? After a beat, Tucker Cordell, Burke's grandson, who Lisa had no doubt was the exact model of the top 2% go-getter that the old man was referring to, laid a hand across the table, narrowly missing hers. I think what Grandfather is saying is that he would like to include some more blue-collar types in this conference. That's not what I'm saying, Burke shot back, sending Tucker skittering back to his seat. I'm just saying there are other types of leaders that make this country great. Sure, business is a component, but it's not the whole enchilada. Jumbled messages were running into each other in Lisa's brain, not the least of which were the 10,000 not at all liking the unspoken invitation in Tucker's eyes when she looked at him. How about this? She tossed her head back. There's the volunteers that work over at the homeless shelter. Maybe I could get some of them to come and give addresses. See, now that's the kind of thinking I like, Burke said, nodding. What else you got? Well, there's the city engineering department, the ones who keep up the bridges and the parks. They might be interesting. She wrote that thought down on the paper in front of her. Keep talking. And then there's the road crews and the police department. And the fire department. Burke pointed at her paper so she would write that down too. In fact, I've even got a good friend over at the station on Bagby. Anson Hayes. He's a captain over there. I can set something up for you to talk with him if you'd like. Her brain didn't like the detour that her heart had suddenly taken, but she nodded in spite of herself. Yeah, that'd be great. Jeff wasn't sure if they would even have the phone hooked up yet, but he had to tell somebody, so he dialed the number and sat on the sofa in his little apartment. When the other side clicked, the feminine voice said, "Hello?" He smiled. So they were further apart, but it didn't mean that he'd totally lost his friends. Hi, Eve. Is Dustin there? Yeah. In the background, there was a tremendous crash and a not-so-subtle string of curse words. Baby, it's for you. Without even trying, Jeff heard the curses that followed his friend to the phone. Yeah. Maybe I should have come and helped you move in, too, Jeff said, enjoying ribbing his friend. Sounds like you could use the help. Oh, yeah? You try moving a 6-ton box of shoes up a flight of stairs. That's what all that weight training in the academy was for. Didn't you read the manual? Dustin laughed. Well, thanks for that. So, to what do I owe the honor of this call? I just figured you'd like to know I'm not going to be homeless. Oh, well, that's nice. How do you figure? I went and talked to Hayes this morning over at Bagby. He wasn't a dramatic person, but the pause certainly had the right effect. I got it. All right, cool. Congratulations. Dustin's voice faded. He got the job. And Jeff heard Eve's voice. Awesome. Eve says congrats. Tell her thanks, Jeff said, and his smile shone inside and out. You start next Monday, right? Yep, we've got a week to find my razor. You? Thursday. I'm going in tomorrow, though, to get my gear, that kind of thing. Fabulous. Dustin said something to Eve, who said something back. Hey, Eve wants to know if you've gone over to Travis yet. Jeff shifted on the sofa, which was suddenly uncomfortable. No, I've been working on making sure I can keep eating. Okay, I understand that, but don't keep finding excuses, or you might just miss your chance. I already did. Yeah, maybe I'll go tomorrow. Terrific. Oh, and tell me how it goes. We want to know. Will do. The next afternoon, after his short appearance at the fire station, Jeff found himself turning right on Travis and staring up at the shiny glass building towering above him. The GTO slowed as it rolled closer to the building, and he wondered if she was in fact in that building at this very moment. He thought about turning into the parking garage just to see if the little white Cavalier might be there, but that was crazy. Even driving by was crazy. A girl like her, she probably had a million guys after her, and every one of them had more money and more class than he would ever have. Trying not to dwell on that any longer than it took to get him to drive by the garage entrance, he shifted into a higher gear and drove on past. no, Lisa wasn't in his league, and he certainly wasn't in hers. Better to leave it be than risk having to hear that face to face. At least this way he had the dreams and the memories. Yes, it was better this way. "Okay, guys, this is the deal," Lisa said as she sat at the head of the conference desk with her ragtag team Tuesday at 4. "We're going in a different direction with this youth thing, and Cordell wants something solid by Monday. So while I'm working on that, Kurt, I need the new concept sheets for the zebra carpet campaign on my desk by Thursday, and I want more than just a few sketches too. I need radio scripts and billboard ideas, and I need the latest ad figures for Chronicle Space." "Got it," Kurt said, and he wrote that down. Lisa wanted to ask if he really did, but there was no time. "Joel, I need an ad-by-ad breakdown of everything we've done so far on Camden, and we need to start month-by-month tracking on Camden sales, too. I don't want last week to happen again, okay? I want to see those as soon as you round them all up. I also need 6 or 7 more usable concepts for that one on my desk by Monday morning. Sherry, I need you to pull up the lists the schools gave us, write the counselors a preliminary letter asking about the viability of a leadership conference for the other 98%. "The other 98%? Sherry asked, stopping the notation. "Yep, all those future leaders who don't even know they're leaders yet." Lisa's thought train stopped. "Hey, I kind of like that." She jotted it on her notebook. "I want to see the letter before you send it." Her gaze traveled over her crew. "That's it, but I want to be kept apprised of all this stuff even though I'm not going to be putting in too much FaceTime around here for a week or so. I'm going to be too busy scaring up willing or non-willing souls for this speaking list. Questions?" None were forthcoming. "Great, then let's hit it." They all started to move. "Oh, Sherry, did you get that thing set up with Hayes?" 5, Thursday, Sherry confirmed. "Fantastic."
Never miss a second of the story. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel today.
Chapter 4. It was like the first day of the rest of Jeff's life, and he felt it. He took one look at himself in the black Houston Fire Department t-shirt and smiled. It felt good. He grabbed his keys and his jacket and left the apartment. As he drove through the early morning light down the streets of the city he loved, his mind drifted back through all the turns that had led him to this moment. A few he smiled at, more than one made his heart pang, but each formed a small brushstroke in the picture he now saw before him. At the station, he parked and walked to the door as the phrase, "This is it," tracked through his mind, and with that, he pushed in. "Yeah, well, you already owe me your wife and kids, so what's the point of even making that bet?" the Hispanic guy said as he and the other guy worked pulling down a long, grimy cotton hose next to the truck. "My wife and kids?" The other guy carefully fed the hose off the top. "Just tell me when you're coming to get them, and I'll be sure to have their stuff packed and on the front porch waiting for you." "You would." At that moment, the door that hadn't fully closed behind Jeff slammed, and both gazes snapped to him. "Hey, it's the new guy." His friend straightened and extended a hand. "Welcome, Hunter Witkowski." "Jeff Taylor." Jeff extended his own hand and a smile. The Hispanic man jumped off the bumper and over the hose, wiped his hand and extended it. "Dante Ramirez." "Nice to meet you, Dante," Jeff said with a nod. Not really knowing what to do next, Jeff looked back to the station behind. "Come on," Dante said. "I'll show you around." "These are the ones for the billboard," Kurt said, as if he might be shot at any moment for saying the wrong thing. "And here's the newest price scale for the Chronicle." The more she looked, the more Lisa's head hurt. "Wait, on this billboard, what are you trying to get across anyway? I mean, this is confusing me, and I'm just sitting here." "Well, the whole 'we've got every kind of carpet you've ever even thought about putting down' angle just came to me." "Just came to you? Like that?" Lisa looked up, feeling defeat right behind her. "At 70 miles an hour, do you know how many words people can read?" Kurt shifted in the chair. No. I'll give you a hint. She looked down and quickly counted the words. It's less than 13 plus all this address and the phone number and the website information. You can't put all of this on there. It doesn't work like that. Well, I just thought they needed contact information. No, this is information overload. She pushed the board back to him. Tighten it up. I don't want more than 10 words, and address or whatever is part of that. Period. 10? But... She cut him off by looking at her watch. I don't have time to hold your hand right now. I've got a meeting. Even as she talked, she stood and straightened her navy suit jacket. I want the new one on my desk before you leave tonight. Fixing the knot of her hair, she stood in front of the tiny mirror off to the side of her desk before she ran a finger across the edge of her deep red lipstick. But this one took me... On her heel she turned. By the time you leave. With that, she grabbed her black leather notepad, her purse, and her keys, and left Kurt still standing in her office. Quickly, she strode past Sherry's desk. I'll be back. Good luck, Sherry called after her, and Lisa threw a hand in the air in answer. Once in the car, she checked her watch again, fluffed the bangs on her upsweep, and twisted the starter. She needed this one. This one was her ace. Around Hayes, she was sure she could build the rest of the program. The first 2 tasks were learning people's names and getting acquainted with the equipment. This truck was far and away better than the model they had trained on, and Jeff was relieved to note that although he was new, the others had all been together for a while. At least it wouldn't be a spin the dial to see who shows up kind of program. Already he felt right at home. Dante and Hunter kept him entertained with their non-stop Abbott and Costello routine, and the best part was that to participate, he really didn't have to say so much as a single word. They were in the middle of refilling air tanks, listening to Dante explain why Levi's come in so many different styles, when Jeff saw the flash of the window of the front door swing across the wall behind him. At first, when he looked over to the threshold, he thought it was just his brain creating some kind of mirage in the sunshine. Then, the fact that clearly this was all a dream he was having flashed across his consciousness, but not one rational thought was able to erase his heart magnetizing his gaze to that door. To her. The dark hair upswept, the curve of her suit at the slim waist, the heels. It was, and yet it couldn't be. In shock, he ducked behind the truck, busying himself with the first tank that attached itself to his hand. Excuse me, she said, and there wasn't a part of him that still believed he was wrong about who was standing in that doorway. Hi, Dante said smoothly as Jeff cowered behind the truck, imagining the scene because he couldn't see it. Something we could help you with? I'm looking for Captain Hayes, she said, and the lilt of her voice tap-danced across Jeff's heart. He closed his eyes, feeling every wisp of it. Oh, he's up in his office. Come on, I'll show you, Dante said. Jeff heard the pings of her heels as she climbed the meshed wire metal stairs across the station from where he stood. Lisa. It was Lisa. She was here. Why was she here? And what on earth should he do next? Dustin would know what to do, but Dustin wasn't here. Thank goodness. Jeff peeked out from behind the truck to see the polished navy weave of her skirt back high above him on the landing. Lest she turn around and see him, he ducked back and flattened himself against the back of the truck. Options rushed over options, all of them viable had he been anybody else. Maybe he could just conveniently be hanging around when she came back down. But how long would she be up there? And what did she want with Hayes? Advertising didn't exactly lend itself to visiting fire stations on a regular basis. Hey, Jeff, Hunter said from the top of the truck. Want to help me with this? Oh, sure. Jeff reached for the rung and pulled himself up just as she disappeared into the office. Yes, he could just conveniently be hanging around. That would work. But then what? He didn't miss the looks back up to the door that Dante made as he returned down the steps and strode to the truck. 2 vaults, and he joined them up top. Now there's a set of chrome I wouldn't mind shining, Dante said, fanning himself as if the fire station had itself just been set ablaze. Nice hooks and ladders, Hunter agreed, and the outsides of Jeff's ears went hot. He crossed his arms. What did you need? Oh, here. Hunter bent to pick up a piece of supply hose. Help me with this. It was nice to have something to do, something to make them stop talking, and something so his heart wouldn't actually pound right out of his chest. As they worked, his own gaze continually traveled up those steps. They were right, of course, she was gorgeous, but his memory and his heart said she was far, far more than that. Right now, I'm putting together a proposal to get the schools interested, Lisa said when Captain Hayes looked at her as if he might throw her out before she got him talked into anything. We've done the traditional businesses talk to the top kids for hundreds of years. We just wanted to try something new with this thing. I thought you were in advertising. The scowl on the captain's face deepened the wrinkles lining his face. I am, but my uncle works for Mr. Cordell, and, well, he thought it would be good advertising for their firm, except their corporate agency thought it was just too far out of what they wanted to do. So my uncle suggested me, and here I am. And here you are. Hayes crossed his arms. And you want me to come and speak at this little gathering of yours? Well, yes, unless you want to send someone in your place. Like I said earlier, nothing is really set yet. We're just putting out feelers to see what's possible on this thing. I don't know. I don't exactly make a habit of booking speaking engagements. Lisa's heart fell with her face. Her ace was slipping away. However, Hayes pulled one of his drawers open and slipped a small card out of it. Here's the number for Vincent Fletcher with the downtown PD. You give him a call. If you can talk Fletch into this thing, I'll consider it. Oh, thank you, sir. She took the card, wondering when she had become so attached to the inner workings of the city of Houston. I'll give him a call this afternoon. Hayes smiled with a secret behind his gray eyes, and Lisa's gaze caught on it. Something in his eyes said he had just won clemency. Before he told her outright that he would jump from the Transco Tower before he'd get up in front of a group of high schoolers, she stood and offered her hand. Thanks so much for your time. Let me know what Fletch says, Hayes said with that smile she didn't like very much. I'll let you know. In the deepest part of his gut, Jeff heard the click of the upstairs door. He had been listening for nothing else during the past half hour. The waiting was enough to make his nerves fray. The instant he heard it, however, his gaze snapped to the figure in navy as it turned and quietly closed the door a story above. Panic gripped him in a tight fist and swung him off the top of the truck and down to the concrete below, where his legs barely caught his weight. She's back, he heard Dante whisper from above, and instantly Jeff grabbed an air tank and put it into the truck. The heels clicked down the stairs, pinging across his heart like a hammer on spikes. Concrete. She was down, and his breathing stopped. Get what you were after? Dante asked, and all of Jeff's motions stopped. Yeah, I did, thanks, she said, and in his mind he saw the smile that had spent the last 5 days floating through his dreams. See you later, Dante called. Yeah, the door clicked open. Later. And the door closed along with Jeff's eyes. If only he had an ounce of courage, he would run after her. Then again, if he had any courage at all, he would have long ago had her number. Taylor, Hunter called from the top, and when Jeff looked up, all he saw was a roll of hose dropping on him fast. Catch! She's gone. Get back to work, his brain screamed as he fought not to fall over the folds of hose. She's gone. The only problem was that his heart was screaming the same thing. Truth be told, Lisa had never been all that attached to fire stations or police departments. No, for way the most part, she had tried to avoid them at all costs. However, as she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder if Jeff had gotten that position he had applied for. A small smile traced across even the doom surrounding her mission. She hoped he had. That soft spot in her heart filled her throat. Jeff somebody in a city of 3 million. It was a given that she would never see him again, and for all the logic of her head saying that was a good thing, she knew in some deep part of her that his name would trace across the expanse of her heart every time she was lucky enough to pass a fire station. Long before his car actually got to it, Jeff noticed the zebra sign as he inched his way up East X Freeway the next morning after work. He smiled at how intricately she had worked the stripes. It was a work of art, even if it wasn't hanging in some stuffy museum. Absent-mindedly, his hand shifted gears down, wondering where she was at this moment. At work? Going home? Somewhere on this very highway? Wherever she was, he knew she would have his heart with her forever. It was a full 48 hours before Lisa slowed down enough to think about him again. The preceding hours had been a mishmash of wedding gowns, campaign concepts, and toasts. They were all intertwined so that her brain was having a hard time sorting them all out. However, as she stood at the top step of the church, watching her sister look so in love, her heart drifted back to the sight of his strong arms and those beautiful pools of blue. In a way, she was glad she hadn't pursued anything. He was probably better as a dream anyway. That way, he hadn't done anything horrible to ruin her perfect picture of him. Who cared that she had no real chance with him? She didn't anyway. Love in the real world was too messy. There were too many things that could get in the way, like what he was really like and what she was really like. Knowing that, though, made the dream that much better. She would take the dream of him over the reality of all the guys she had ever actually known in a heartbeat. That understanding only solidified when Luke, Corey's best bud in the whole world, the classy guy her sister's new husband had picked for a best man, chose the moment she had potatoes and brown gravy 2 inches from her mouth to slide his hand under the table and onto her knee. A barely muffled gasp jumped from her throat as the potatoes leaped from her fork and landed squarely on the center of her cream skirt with a swirl of vines and pink flowers. "Lisa?" Haley said with concern, looking down the head table. "Are you okay?" Yeah," Lisa said, wishing she could knock Mr. Hand into another wedding party. "Here, let me help you." Luke's tone dropped as he reached for his napkin. "I've got it." Lisa slid backward as anger slashed through the words. "I'm fine. I'll just be in the ladies' room." "Lise, are you sure?" Haley asked her sister's retreating back. In the bathroom, Lisa turned the water on full blast before dabbing and then scrubbing at the gravy. Great. With no small amount of work, the stain finally looked like it was at least part of the whole general color scheme of the skirt. The only problem was the water spot didn't. Trying not to think about the logistics of her undertaking, she wiped the side of the sink off, sat down carefully, and hit the button on the hand dryer. Yeah, this was exactly where she wanted to spend her evening. If Luke so much as looked at her wrong, he was in for a rude awakening. It took more time than she wanted, but her skirt finally dried about the time her hatred for all things male reached a boiling point. With a look in the mirror to straighten and perfect, she put her head high and walked back out to rejoin the festivities. However, she had barely sat down when Luke laid a casual arm across the back of her chair and leaned over to her ear. "It's almost time for the toast. You want to go first, or should I?" he asked in a whisper that sent puffs of air skittering across her neck. You can go first," she said, fighting to smile. Good. His proximity hadn't shifted. "I like to go first." Her smile faded as he stood, and she choked back a scream. In seconds, the crowded hall was laughing at something he had said, and Lisa willed herself to just get through this. When he sat back down, Luke laid that same hand on her, only this time it missed her knee and landed several inches higher. "Your turn." Putting her head high, she pushed his hand away, pushed away from the table, and stood. She picked up her glass and turned to the happy couple, vowing that if Luke so much as brushed across her backside as she did, She would douse him with a sparkling liquid in her glass. "Haley," Lisa said, and her sister's gaze made all the bad things slide from her mind. "I wish you luck, and I wish you love. I want you to know I am here for you always." A chorus of "ah" sounded through the hall. "And Corey, if you hurt her, I'll kill you," she said, and although there was a measure of levity in her voice, she knew there was just enough seriousness to get her point across. She raised her glass. "To Haley and Corey." "Haley and Corey," rang out around her. For a full 2 hours, Lisa had managed to stay out of Luke's vicinity. However, when the third dance of the evening arrived, she knew she had run out of time to run. "You know," Luke pulled her closer even as she strained to push him away. "They say there are 2 couples that make it home together on a wedding night, the bride and groom, and the 2 that stand up for them." "Oh, really?" Lisa could smell the alcohol on his breath as her brain threatened mutiny if she didn't figure out a way to get away from him soon. Too bad that's not going to be happening tonight. "Why not?" His hand tightened around hers as his arm did the same. "I'm free, you're free. We can be free together." "Because I think you're a jerk," Lisa said as Haley and Corey danced by, all smiles. "Don't get any ideas, Lisa," Haley teased. "Don't worry," Lisa called after them, but they were gone. "You smell so good." Luke leaned into her until the only space that could be counted as hers was that underneath her ribcage. "What's that perfume, anyway?" "Desire," Lisa said, and then immediately wished she had thought to lie. Fitting, don't you think?" She wrenched her arm between them for breathing room, if nothing else. "I wouldn't know." The music picked that moment to end, and for half a second she thought the torture was over. Unfortunately, Luke didn't get the same message. Like a steel trap, his arm wrapped around her, and barring pitching him to the floor and running, she didn't see a good way to get away. The next song started, and he never so much as asked her before she was again fighting against the press of his body. Not one part of her wanted to know how long he was planning to keep this up, or what ingenious designs he had for the remainder of the evening. Not one. By midnight, Lisa wasn't sure if it was the hour or the non-sleep she had gotten the 2 nights before, but her eyes were in an all-out battle just to stay open. "Well, it's that time." Luke strode over to her and took her hand, which she promptly jerked away from him. "What time?" "Time to take the newlyweds to their car, of course." "I thought I'd just stay here and—" "We're ready," Corey said, his bride's hand tucked in his. "Great, we are too," Luke said, and before Lisa had a chance to realize what was coming, he spun and caught her shoulders under his arm. "Let's get." "Where are you going?" Lisa asked in anger when Luke turned in the opposite direction from the hall after they had dropped their passengers off. Her eyelids felt like they might betray her and close permanently at any moment, but she knew the danger of allowing them that luxury. "The hall's that way." "My place," Luke said, trying to sound smooth. "Just sit back and relax. We'll be there in a second." As if he really thought this was leading somewhere, he reached over and his hand landed across Lisa's knee. No." She pushed his hand away. "We're not. We're going back to the hall." He looked at her in annoyance. "What is your problem?" "Guys," she said, irritation searing her tone. "Guys are my problem. Now take me back, or you're not going to have to wonder who's got a problem." Luke's face fell. "Geez, Corey said you were bad, but he didn't say you were an ice queen." Ice queen. She folded her arms as she pressed herself against the opposite door. She rather liked that title. Jeff's first real call came at rush hour on Monday evening. Getting his employment records in line was a far more daunting task than he had thought it would be when he went in that afternoon, and now he was stuck in wall-to-wall traffic. With a window rolled down, He laid his arm through the opening and drummed his fingers to the static mixed music on the AM radio. It had been a good week, not really exciting, but in his line of work, that was a good thing. The farther he drove up Eastex, however, the slower traffic got. He could just see the zebra-painted billboard in the distance, and he smiled at the thoughts it pulled up. The wedding was over by now, and he wondered how work had gone for her this week. He thought again about Dustin's idea of knocking on every door in her office building, and if it hadn't been so totally not him, he might have considered it. The honking from around him brought him out of his daydreams, and he looked around. Cars were everywhere, and although it was always slow going at this time of day, this was more like no going. In fact, as he looked ahead, nothing seemed to be moving at all. That's when he saw the people almost a mile ahead of him, standing on the right side of the road in one big knot of humanity. There was only one thing that brought great crowds of people out of their cars on a rush-hour drive home: tragedy. His first thought was a wreck. His second, that emergency vehicles were going to have a terrible time getting up on the freeway and to the injured at this time of day. It was a decision, and yet, really, there was no decision at all as he angled his car as far off the side of the road as he could get it, parked it, got out, and sprinted past the now honking and beeping mess. The closer he got, the more he knew it had to be bad for that many people to be standing there. When he reached the first straggler of the group, he asked, "What's going on?" "Somebody's jumping," came the reply, and Jeff's feet shifted up a gear. On the outskirts of the crowd, he pushed through. "Fire department, excuse me, fire department." He felt the gazes of the people he passed, but he pressed on. This was no time to be shy about his place in the world. "Excuse me, excuse me." When he finally broke through to the other side of the crowd, all the training he had amassed suddenly seemed horribly inconsequential. There, standing on the other side of the concrete railing, was a young man, perhaps a decade younger than he himself, or maybe more. His arms were stretched out behind him, holding on to the concrete wall, but with one look, Jeff could see the precariousness of that hold. With no time to review any manuals, he stepped past the crowd and approached the scene slowly. It was as though the world around him was in mayhem, and he was in the eye of the storm. "Hey," Jeff said, as if he was walking up to Dustin to say good morning. The young man, wild-eyed and wary, spun to look at him, and Jeff saw his hold slip. "Stay away. I'm going to jump. I swear I will." Jeff held up both hands to signal that he wasn't coming any closer. "It's cool, man. I'm staying right here." He took a breath to calm the adrenaline rushing through him. "You know, jumping isn't going to solve anything." The kid's gaze turned back to the street below. "Yes, it will." A fight was the last thing he wanted to start. "Okay, well, then what's so bad that this is the answer?" "Everything." "Everything, huh? Yeah, well, I'm sorry, what was your name?" The gaze was back with more anger this time. "My name?" "Yeah, I mean, if we're going to have this little conversation, it might be nice if I at least knew your name." "Oh." The gaze turned back to the wind. It's Parker." "Okay, Parker. Well, it's nice to meet you. I'm Jeff." One slow inch at a time, he moved closer. "Hey, man, can we talk about this? I mean, come on, you don't want to do this." "Yes, I do. I'm sick of life." "Oh, really? Tell me one thing that's so bad it's worth this." A pause as the horns continued to sound from every level around them. "Why should I tell you? You don't care. You're just like all the rest of them." "The rest of who?" Jeff heard the wail of a siren blending in with the horns, and he knew help was on the way. However, they were still too far to get here in time if he didn't keep talking. "Tell me who you're talking about, Parker." "Everyone. Mom, Dad, the kids at school." "They don't care about you?" "No, they'll all be glad when I'm gone. Then they can pick on somebody else." "Pick on somebody? Who? The kids at school?" Slowly the edges of the light brown hair moved up and down over the dark black glasses frames. "Oh, I see. So you're going to give them the power to kill you, too? Jeff asked pointedly, hating every gust of wind that brushed past them. What? Parker turned to Jeff, taken aback by the statement. Well, they push you around at school, right? What do they do, make fun of you? The gaze turned back to the street as the head nodded. And trash your stuff? The nodding continued. And make it so nobody else wants to be your friend? Every word was hitting the mark. And so your answer to that is to hand them the power to push you off the edge of a bridge. Good plan. The nodding stopped as Jeff looked up and saw the paramedics running up the shoulder from the other direction. Instinctively, he put his hands up to slow them down. In Parker's state, it would take only one surprise to send him plummeting to the asphalt 4 stories below. One heartbeat, and Jeff made eye contact with the first paramedic that broke through the crowd. That one look stopped the young man cold. The paramedic, several inches shorter than Jeff and looking like a cocky jock with his hat turned backward, halted and then approached on soft feet. A silent conversation passed between them, and the paramedic nodded his understanding of the situation. You don't understand, Parker said from the edge, and both gazes snapped to him. Then help me, Jeff said softly. Help me understand. Before he even heard the words, he heard the tears. I go there every day, and every day it's the same thing. They hate me, so they push me down, and they call me a maggot and a faggot, and they say the only thing I'm really good at is being a punching bag. Jeff looked across at his partner in this rescue, and the ache bled through his eyes as well. They pull my shorts down in PE, and they throw my clothes out the window, and I never did anything to them. I swear I didn't. I tell them to stop, but they just think it's funny, and they make more fun of me. I told one of the teachers, but he said to suck it up and be a man. Well, I'm tired of being a man. I'm tired of hurting all the time. They can just find somebody else to pick on from now on. And they will, Jeff said slowly. Instantly, his partner looked over at him in fearful shock. For a second, a question ran through his face, and then Jeff knew he understood. When you're gone tomorrow, they'll find somebody else to pick on, and they won't even remember you. Is that really what you want? He's right, the paramedic said, matching his soft tone. Parker's gaze swung around to him as Jeff's heart caught in his throat. He is. If you jump, you give them the last laugh. Checkmate. They win. The world and Jeff's heart screeched to a halt. Is that what you really want, man? A gust brushed past them, and Jeff held his breath. No, Parker finally said like a breath. I don't know. I'm just so confused. Then this is no time to be making a big decision like this one, Jeff said, sensing the tri-bond that had just formed between them. He took a small step forward. Come on, Parker. Take my hand and come back across. We can work this out, I promise. It's so hard, Parker said, and Jeff saw the hand on the other side release. Parker, he held his hand out palm up. Just take my hand, okay? Just take my hand and we'll talk about this. One agonizing inch at a time, the hand came across, and finally it touched Jeff's. He could feel the life flowing through that hand, its potential. Good, man. Okay, careful. 1 foot at a time, Parker scaled the concrete wall separating them, and when he was back in the land of the living, Jeff breathed a grateful sigh of relief. Slowly, Parker slid down the concrete to the asphalt as fatigue crowded over his features. Jeff sat on his heels next to the paramedic as the other rescue personnel worked to disperse the crowd. He laid a gentle hand on the bony shoulder of the young teenager. How you doing? You okay? The nod was there, but barely. Good. These guys are going to take care of you now, okay? Sad, frightened eyes looked up at him. You're leaving? No, Jeff said without hesitation. But I don't think you want me checking you out. Doctoring's not really my department. 2 other paramedics broke in as Jeff stood and stepped over to the railing. It was then that he saw the news trucks and the gathering that was now dispersing beneath the bridge. One life, hardly noticed to this point, and yet when the possibility of it leaving the earth arrived, everyone else stopped to take notice. Why was that? Why doesn't anyone stop until it's all over? He breathed out against the air that was blowing in his face. "He was lucky you were here," the voice said from behind him, and Jeff turned to see that backward-turned cap. The paramedic, looking even younger than he had a few moments before, held out a fist, and Jeff hit the top of it. "I think I was more scared than he was," Jeff admitted. "Well, you didn't show it." Then the paramedic held out his hand. "A.J. Knight." Jeff Taylor. It was amazing the strength of a friendship formed in a crisis. "You with the department?" A.J. asked in reference to the little yellow letters on Jeff's t-shirt. "Yeah, I just started last week." "Cool. We need more like you out here." "Just trying to help." Then he looked over to Parker, who was now surrounded by the emergency crew but standing again. "I think I'll just go over and see how he's doing. I'll go with you." Together they turned and approached the little group. "Hey, Parker," Jeff said when he got close enough to see the young man. "You good?" The only thing keeping the tears from falling from the young man's eyes was the knot of men surrounding them. "Yeah. I'm glad you made it back, man." The looks Tucker was giving her sent chills, and not the good kind, up Lisa's spine Tuesday afternoon as she sat across the table for lunch with him and his grandfather. "It's like this whole kid on the bridge thing," Burke said, chewing on his steak. "That kid's got no home life, no friends. The kids pick on him every day. What do we expect a kid in that situation to do? It's either kill everybody else or kill yourself. 2 choices, and they're both rotten. That's the kind of kid I want to reach with this thing." Lisa nodded, fighting to look interested even as her lunch crawled back up into her throat. 1 Luke a week should be punishment enough, but if she wasn't losing her perceptiveness, another one was sitting right across from her at this very moment. "So, what did Anson say?" Burke asked, jerking Lisa from her karate fantasy. "Oh, he gave me the number for Vincent Fletcher. He's like the police chief or something. I've got a meeting with him in the morning. As soon as I get him on board, I'll go back and talk to Hayes." "Fletcher's tough," Burke said, twisting his face out of normal. "Anson thought he would help?" "He thought it was worth a try," Lisa hedged. She wished her gaze would just quit sending alarm signals to her brain. This was no time for that. She pulled herself up to her full height. "Besides, I can be pretty tough myself." "Yeah, well, I hope so," Burke said unhappily. "Otherwise, Fletch just might chew you up and spit you out." Terrific. The ones she wanted to talk to didn't want to talk to her, and the ones she didn't want to get within 15 feet of ogled her like a cat looking at the catch of the day. "I'm not worried. I'm sure I can handle Fletcher. I've handled guys far, far worse." And she smiled sweetly at the cat sitting across the table from her.
Never miss a second of the story. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel today.
Chapter 5. "Options," Lisa said as she sat across the desk from Vincent Fletcher Wednesday morning. "It's all about options. We've got kids out there who don't have options. They look around, and all they see is that they don't have the options that the other kids do. It's called learned helplessness." She had read that several years before and had thought it was all a bunch of psychobabble at the time, but if it had a shot at getting through to the human version of Jabba the Hutt sitting cross-armed in front of her, it was worth a shot. What Cordell Enterprises is trying to do is to show these kids that they have real options, and not just to be some hired hand working for minimum wage in some plant, but real options to lead and to make a difference in the community. "And why would I want some minimum wage anvil joining my force?" Fletcher asked, clearly unimpressed. Because, you see, sir, we're all minimum wage anvils until we decide to be something more. But none of us decides to be more until we really believe that's possible. You think I ever thought about starting my own company when I was 15? No way! That was too far away to think about. But I was lucky enough to have a teacher who showed some interest in me. She helped me with my art, she made my art important, and she helped me see that there were lots of other options with art other than just trying to get it hung in some gallery. That's what I'm wanting to give these kids, options. Without them, they're going to end up in here on one side of the desk. I'm just asking that you take a couple of hours out of your very busy schedule to show them that the other side of the desk is possible too. She sat, sensing that all the arguments in the world would get her nowhere. But if you're too busy... Slowly Fletcher leaned forward. Are the schools in yet? Exasperation jumped from her. See, that's the problem. Everyone's standing on the sidelines going, well, I'm not committing until they commit. And while everyone's standing around waiting for somebody else to make the first move, we've got kids carrying guns to school and jumping off bridges because we're all just too busy to be bothered, or we're too worried about how it will look if we get in and nobody else does. Well, I'll be honest with you, sir. All the heroics on all the bridges in the whole world aren't going to matter a single ounce if somebody doesn't get in this darn boat and start rowing. With steely, hard eyes, Fletcher looked at her. You're intense. You know that, Miss Matheson? So I've been told, she said with no smile whatsoever. So, what do you say, sir? You in or out? He took one breath, shook his head, and exhaled. Okay, I'm in. Looks like you pulled some overtime, Dante said when Jeff walked into the break room on Thursday morning. He was glad to be back to work. Time off was just one solid sheet of agony. Overtime? Jeff asked as he grabbed a drink from the water fountain. Is the new schedule out? No, man, Dante said in exasperation. That whole hero thing on the bridge, I think Hunter's even got it on tape. Oh, great. No, man, you looked good. It's cool. Dante lowered his eyes with concern. Isn't it? I was just doing my job. He went to the cabinet and looked inside. It wasn't a big deal. Wrong, man, Dante said as he stood and set his glass in the sink next to Jeff. Saving a life is a very big deal. On his heel, Dante turned and walked out as Jeff's head fell on the weight of the statement. He hadn't meant that the way it sounded. The fact that God had placed him on that bridge at that moment was not a responsibility he took lightly, nor one he would have simply passed on, but he just didn't like the 5 seconds of fame that went with it. It was going to be a long day. Hey, Taylor, how's it going? Hunter asked as he strode into the break room where Jeff was grabbing a drink 6 hours later. Good, Jeff said. What do we have left? Station cleanup. You can start with the bathrooms and then do the break room, Hunter said, looking around at the tables littered with remnants of meals gone by. Oh, and don't forget the gunky stuff around this sink. It's looking pretty skanky. Dante strode in. Come on, Daunt-man, we've got an appointment with a basketball court, Hunter said, turning Dante around. Destroy the skankiness. Jeff looked at the sink when they were gone. I can do that. He was right earlier. This day was turning out great. The more they told her it couldn't be done because nobody wanted to do it, the more determined Lisa became to make this work. One way or the other, if she had to drag these people up to that podium, she was going to make this happen. Hayes wouldn't be thrilled that Fletcher said yes. Of that much she was sure. But what she couldn't quite decide was if he would have the guts to stick to his word anyway. Guys and promises. He was a guy, so it didn't look good going in. With a shove, she pushed through the station's front door at 4 o'clock, but this time there weren't people swarming across the tops of the trucks. In fact, nobody seemed to be anywhere. She shook her head and peered around the station. Hello? Anybody here? Hello? The braid at her back swung around her shoulder as she turned to glance outside. Still no one. The trucks were here, so they couldn't all be gone. "Hello? Anybody here?" "Sorry, everybody's out." The moment froze between them as suddenly the man she had seen only in her dreams for more than 2 weeks was somehow, beyond comprehension, standing right in front of her. Back. "Lisa?" Her sanity ran smack into the expanse of muscles protruding from his black t-shirt. "Jeff? What?" She laughed. "Wow, this is a surprise." He looked like he wanted to smile for one short moment, then he looked down at the plastic kitchen cleaning gloves on his hands. Not too subtly, he pulled them off. "Yeah, it is." The gloves were off now, and he looked around for somewhere to put them. Finally, he laid them on a table behind the wall. Are you here to see the captain again?" "Again?" she asked in surprise. He scratched the top of his nose. "Well, the guy said that a lady came to see him the other day. We don't get many ladies coming in around here unless they're carrying cotton hoses. I just thought..." She smiled at his nervousness. "Actually, I'm supposed to have an appointment with him in 5 minutes." "Oh, well, he was out back with the guys the last I saw him," Jeff said, but even after his words stopped, nobody moved. Her eyebrows went up when she sensed that she might have to figure out where out back was herself. Then the realization lit in his eyes. "Oh, I can show you if you want." "That would probably help." "It's this way." He pointed back in the direction he had come. Wishing they weren't in the middle of a fire station, she nodded, and half following, half leading, she walked down that hallway to another. At the end of the second hallway, he slipped in front of her and popped the door open as sounds of an in-progress basketball game met her ears. Together, they walked to the fence, and she noticed how he kept himself and his gaze well away from her. "Captain, there's someone here to see you." In that instant, the game stopped, and 8 sets of eyes turned to them. "We had an appointment?" Lisa pointed to her watch, and in annoyance, Captain Hayes walked off the court and grabbed a towel off the bench. "We didn't cancel that?" he asked gruffly. No, sir, we didn't." The heel of her shoe shifted under her weight. Standing there, the gazes of 3/4 of a dozen guys trained on her, she felt like that fish in the market window again. Even that would have been all right, except that her senses kept telling her just how close Jeff's arm was to hers, and that alone was enough to send her sanity scattering. "Oh, well, I thought we had." Hayes ran the towel over his face. "Well, let's get this over with, I guess. You're going to have to play without me, boys." The 3 of them barely made it back to the door before the game resumed. At the door, Jeff opened it, and, pushing the strand of hair behind her ear, Lisa entered in front of him. The darkness engulfed her after the brightness of the sunshine, and she willed herself not to trip on some unseen obstacle on her way through the back of the station. If you don't mind, I'm just going to duck in here and get cleaned up a little," Hayes said, stopping at a door. "Oh, no problem," she said amiably. "I'll just be down here, waiting." He nodded and disappeared through the door, and, just like that, they were alone again. Hesitating with each small movement, she turned and headed back for the front. "So, I guess this means you got that job, then?" Jeff held his hands out, palms up. "Yep, this is it." "Nice." When they reached the break room door, he stopped, and she stopped too. "So, why weren't you out?" "New guy on board," he said with a tight smile. "I get to clean, they get to play." "Ah, low man on the totem pole." Basically. Neither gaze could hold the other for more than a few seconds at a time, and his finally fell to the floor between them. "I didn't know we were exactly into advertising the stations. Is business that bad?" She laughed. "No, not really. I'm just trying to rope Hayes into speaking at the youth thing, but I don't think he's too thrilled about it." "Yeah, I could kind of tell." Was it that obvious? She leaned closer to him, although her arms were safely crossed at her chest. "I think he hates me." His soft blue eyes caught hers. Why would he hate you? She wrinkled her nose. Because I didn't just go away. A breath made it past his throat just as a door snapped down the hallway, and instantly they both looked toward it and backed away from each other. Through the darkened hallway, Hayes emerged. I'm ready, he said, and with only one backward glance at Jeff, she left him standing there by the break room, wishing she never had to walk away. The scum around the sink was gone long before the guys came back in, and it was immediately obvious that her appearance had given them ample fodder for conversation. I'm not saying I'm going after her, Hunter said, sliding into one of the break room chairs. I'm just saying at this moment I wouldn't mind being in the chief's chair. Did you catch a ring on that finger? Dante asked, because I could handle having some of that honey in my hive, if you know what I mean. In disgust, Jeff threw the rag he was finishing up with onto the sink. Bodies. It was all the guys thought of. Where are you going? Hunter asked as Jeff hit the door with one hand. I was going out to check the truck. I noticed one of the tires is low. He didn't wait for the shrug Hunter gave him before he pushed out of the room. Quickly, he took a look at his watch. 20 more minutes, and he would be sprung from active duty to stand down. At the tire, he bent and put the tester on it. He was right. It was a little low. Not enough to even really notice, but at least he didn't have to hang out in the break room and hear the crude remarks. That had never been his style. In fact, unfortunately, he really didn't have any style when it came to women, but if he had, it certainly wouldn't have been that. Quickly, he unwound the air hose, dragged it over to the tire, and attached it. Just work and forget about all of that. But for all the coaching, his own thoughts kept going up those stairs and into that chair just across from her. Fletch said yes? The captain asked in utter disbelief. Yes, he did. Lisa kept her tone level and professional. So, I just wanted to confirm your position on the schedule as well. When is this thing again? Mid-October. We haven't really set a firm date yet. We're trying to get all the available voices in first. Well, it's kind of hard to commit to something like that. It's a long time until October. Look, sir, I appreciate that, but in order to have a list to present to the schools, I have to get some solid yeses to go on. Now, when I was here last week, I was under the impression that I had your word that if Mr. Fletcher agreed, you would too. Was I mistaken in that impression? The wrinkles on the face deepened into a scowl. And what kind of presentation do I have to do? Some outline to explain the duties of the fire department and the leadership roles available. And I have to do it myself? Slowly, Lisa shrugged as her mind tripped down the stairs. I guess you could send someone in your place if you absolutely had to, but I really think it would be more effective if you did it. But we can work that out later. Right now, I need to know if I can put the fire department down with your name as a participant. To bring more pressure, she put the tip of the pen in hand to the notebook. Will you stand by the police department in helping the kids of our community? Yes, she had learned a few things about high-pressure sales tactics. Okay, put me down. But I'd like to be kept apprised of the others who you con into this thing. She smiled. Con? Yes, con, Ms. Matheson. You are good at it. Why, thank you, sir. Hey, Taylor. Hunter strode out into the station at just after 5. You did get the groceries, right? Groceries? Jeff straightened from where he was checking the last tire on the truck. No, I didn't know we needed them. What do you think? That refrigerator's going to stock itself? Hunter asked with a sarcastic laugh. Or are you good at cooking with air? Cooking? I thought Brady and Dante were cooking tonight. No, Brady and Dante have a standing date with a poker hand on Thursday night. So that leaves you. What's it going to be? You going to get groceries, or are you treating everybody tonight? Slowly, Jeff scratched his ear, having not seen this bend until he was around it. I guess I could get some pizza or something. Oh, come on. We had pizza last week. Get a little creative at least. Creative, creative. It was hard to be creative when he'd been working nonstop since just before 6:30 a.m. Well, there's a little place a few blocks down. I think they do takeout. Well, then, what are you standing around for? Supper's supposed to be served at 6. After taking orders from around the station, Jeff walked down the hallway from the lockers, pulling his coat on as he did. It was time to stop bringing the coat, he thought, swinging it on anyway. Middle of April was far too long to be dragging that thing everywhere. He stepped past the break room on cat feet so as not to call more attention to himself. If Hunter so much as noticed he was in the vicinity, it was a sure bet he would find something new to rag on him about. Trying to keep his spirit and energy from smashing into the ground, he turned from the hallway and nearly crashed right into Lisa, coming the other direction. "Hey," he said as his attention snapped to her. "You get your speaker?" "Barely," she said with a small smile. "You get your cleaning done?" "Barely." A moment, and then she started for the door. "I guess I'll see you." "You want some company?" he asked, wishing there was a way to just stay with her without having to ask all the time. He saw her hesitation. "To your car, I mean. The guys want takeout. I'm the designated gopher." "Oh, sure," she said, with an uncertain nod. He opened the door for her, and together they walked out into the sunshine. His hands found his jacket pockets, and although it was 80 degrees, the safety of his pockets felt very good. "So are you going home?" he asked, swinging his feet side to side so that the walk to the car had nothing straight associated with it. "Yeah, a whole bunch of work, a little home." She shrugged. "Not that home's all that great anyway. Little apartment and a television to talk to." His gaze swung to her. "You sure that's your life you're talking about there? Sounds like you've been spy-camming mine." They ambled into the parking lot, and his heart hurt at the sight of her little car in the visitor spot. He needed something to prolong this. "So, are you hungry? I'm going to get food anyway." The look she shot his direction sent him back into his own corner. "I'm not really big on dinner." "Oh," he said softly, but he couldn't let her get away again. "Coffee? You a Starbucks fan?" "I'm not really into coffee." She shook her head, and he noticed how her gaze traveled out to the traffic, far away from his. Every logical part of him said she was trying to let him down easy, but in this case there would never be an easy. "Then how about a Coke float?" he asked, and that snapped her gaze back to his. "A Coke float?" "Yeah, you know, Coke and ice cream." He shrugged. "A Coke float." Her eyebrows scrunched together. "And you get these where?" "Couple blocks down." He nodded forward as their steps reached the back of her car and stopped. "It's the little cafe I was going to. Nothing fancy, but it's kind of cool." He waited, and when she said nothing, the fact that he was making a huge fool of himself scratched across his soul. "I'm sorry. If you don't want to, that's cool. I just thought—" She stopped him with one look. "It sounds like fun." In all the days she had been alive, Lisa thought that she could surely have learned to control herself by now. So where the "it sounds like fun" had come from, she had no idea. Nonetheless, she found herself sitting in a booth across from him, a tall fountain glass filled with soft serve and Coke in front of her as he waited for the full order he had placed to be finished. "I can't believe you've never had one of these," Jeff said in that voice that made her toes curl. "Me and Kit lived on these things when we were growing up." "Nutritional," Lisa said with a nod. "Yep, right up there with broccoli and sprouts." He took a drink of his, and then he looked at her with anticipation and a small amount of apprehension. "It won't kill you, I promise." Slowly she took a sip from the straw, and a reluctant smile crossed her lips. "Good, huh?" he asked, smiling for her. She brushed the hair from her face as the fingers on the other hand laid softly on the table. "Pretty good." Admitting any more scared her. "Told you." He leaned back in the booth and arched his arm over the back of it, pulling the heat to her cheeks. "So, tell me about this youth thing you're working on." Looked like the captain was elated. She let out an exasperated sigh and shook her head. You would think it wouldn't be that big of a deal to stand up in front of a bunch of high schoolers and tell them about your job, but it's more like I'm proposing to Chinese water torture them. She leaned back and crossed her arms in a perfect imitation of Hayes and Fletcher. Why don't you come back when somebody else says yes, Ms. Matheson? I don't have the guts to be the first one to say yes to this little scheme of yours. It's so frustrating. Then she glanced around, lest one of them might be standing behind her, before ducking and taking another sip of her drink. If I could have just had the businessmen do it, this would have been a snap. He leaned forward. So, why didn't you? That's not what the client wants, and the client is always right. Ah, the real boss, he said, and she smiled at his grasp of the situation. That's what they don't tell you about owning your own business. You don't have one boss, you've got 10 clients, and each of them think they are the only project you are working on. Voila, 10 bosses. It's completely annoying. I can imagine. The blue of his eyes softened. But I'm sure you're up to the challenge. Sometimes I wonder, Lisa sighed softly. It just seems like the harder I work, the farther behind I get. Like I'm on some kind of hamster wheel going around and around and around, and the only way off is just to get flung into the cage wire. Her finger traced several circles in the air and then pitched off to one side. She shook her head and put her lips to the straw. Sometimes I wonder if it's even worth it. He watched her take a sip of the swirled white-brown liquid. Hopelessness dragged her spirit down. I just keep thinking maybe there's something else I should be doing. Something more important or something. Like what? He asked, and she felt his gaze, although she didn't look up. Like what you guys do, being out there, saving lives. That's something worthwhile. Not just putting some dinky little ads in a newspaper people are going to trash tomorrow. For a second he watched her. That's funny, he finally said thoughtfully. What's funny? He shrugged. I used to think the same thing back in college. Her forehead furrowed in surprise, and he laughed. Yeah, college. B.A., general business. Not for me, for my dad, really. But I put in the hours, and it says my name on the diploma. But business wasn't what I really wanted to do. I really wanted this. So, after college, I worked for a couple of years at a job I hated. And then I decided it was now or never. So, you chased your dream. Yep. But you know, it's funny. I've been telling myself that once I was here, I would feel different. That I would be different. But now I'm here, and it's still me. I mean, I look around, and not much has really changed like I thought it would. He looked across at her. Well, in most things, anyway. So in some ways, life has changed, though? Yeah. His gaze went to his finger tracing up and down the glass. But that's not because of work. There was a beat in which neither of them said anything. Taylor, your order's ready, the cashier called, and Lisa's attention snapped across the little restaurant. He slid out of the booth with no more words. She stood with him and swiped 4 bills from her purse as he held up his hand and reached for his own wallet. No, hey, this is on me. Anger and fear flared. I can pay my own way. A slow, lopsided smile slipped onto his face. I didn't say you couldn't. His hand didn't move when it had the wallet open. Please, my treat. Every particle of her was screaming, no, don't let him, he'll think you owe him. However, a hard fist in her chest forced her to nod and pick up her money. Okay. She was going back to the office after all, back to safety. He wouldn't follow her there. He couldn't. Quickly, he paid first at the table and then at the cashier's for the food. Lisa waited only long enough for him to grab the bags of food before she stepped away from him in case he had any notion of leading her out. On her own push, the bells on the door jingled as she strode out into the early Houston evening with him barely catching the door behind her. She was a woman after all, not a helpless child, and letting him get every door wasn't the best way to show him she had no intention of owing him anything, now or ever. They walked down the sidewalk as the bags of food banged into his leg with every step. Steps and steps they walked until they were standing on a curb side by side. Have you ever noticed that you can't actually get all the way across a street in this town without the "Don't Walk" sign flashing? He asked, and her gaze jumped over to him as she wondered where that observation had come from. What? I'm telling you, you can't. There was not even a hint of levity in his tone. The sign says, "Walk." You take 2 steps into the street, and it starts flashing, "Don't walk, don't walk." I mean, why don't they just make it say, "Run," and be done with it? Skeptical climbed over her as she fought not to laugh. However, his craziness was too much to withstand. She looked over at him, and then shook her head and laughed. "You don't believe me," he said as he looked out across the intersection. "See, watch, I'll show you." The lights on the intersection flashed green to red, a second, and then the sign said, "Walk." Sure enough, she had barely made it 3 steps into the street before it started flashing, "Don't walk, don't walk." Told you. At the other curb, she stepped up onto the sidewalk. And how long did this earth-shattering inspiration take you to discover, Einstein? It used to be a game, Jeff said with a shrug. When Mom would drag us shopping, Kit and I would stand on the curb like we were at a track meet and try to race the walk signs. Did you ever win? Not once. And your mom let you do that? Run across the street? She never knew. Lisa's eyebrows arched skyward, and he looked at her and smiled. "Holding hands. That was a big deal with Mom," he said with a sheepish grin. "You didn't get out of the car, that she wasn't going. You boys get somebody's hand. To this day, it feels weird crossing a parking lot by myself." Lisa laughed outright. "You'll go into a burning building, but you can't cross the street without holding somebody's hand?" He leaned closer to her. "Don't tell anybody. It might ruin my image." "Oh, okay, I won't," she said, as if they now shared a conspiracy. They reached the next curb. Together, but separate, they stood waiting. However, the moment the sign changed, she sensed that they were indeed in a race to see if one of them could beat the mythical sign. It didn't work. Not even midway across it flashed, "Don't walk," and Lisa wondered how many times she had crossed a street and never noticed that phenomenon. Once they reached the other side, their steps fell in sync with each other, and although to an outsider it might not have been obvious that they were together, to Lisa it felt like they were one in the same. "So, do you work tomorrow?" "No, all night tonight, the 24-hour shift thing. Then I'm off until Sunday." 24 hours? Ugh. "Yeah, as long as we don't get middle-of-the-night calls, it's okay." They walked a couple of steps as her heart said she hadn't remembered this walk being this short on the way to the soda shop. "You working tomorrow?" He swung his gaze on her for the briefest of seconds. "Of course. I work all the time. Weekdays, weekends, morning, noon, night, 4 o'clock in the morning." "You don't sleep?" She shook her head. "Too many things to think about most nights to spend time doing something so trivial." 4 o'clock in the morning, huh? Slowly she nodded as they traced their way into the parking lot. "Well, I guess now I'll be up at 4 o'clock in the morning half the time, too." He drifted off on thoughts of the nighttime. It's really a weird time of day if you think about it. I mean, it's strange to be up when everyone else is asleep. Lisa shrugged. "I don't know. It's the nice time of the day for me. Nobody calls. I've got the world all to myself. No clients, no employees, just me and work." "That's funny. The other night I was wondering why in the world anyone else would be up at that ungodly hour. It's nice to know I wasn't the only one." At her car, he leaned back on the Trailblazer next to it. "So, you think I could, I don't know, get your number or something so I could find out if I'm the only one awake the next time?" "My number?" she asked, and her skin jumped away from him. "Oh, I don't really give out my number." "Oh." He nodded and halfway smiled. "That's cool. I just thought—" "Stupid, don't do this." The thoughts clawed through her, even as she dug into her purse. "Tell him no, Lisa. Leave. now." However, her hand produced her business card for her heart, and with her gaze down, she offered it to him. "In case you're ever bored at 4 o'clock in the afternoon." Gently, he smiled at her as he took it. "Like when I need a break from sink cleaning?" "Yeah, something like that," she agreed with a reluctant smile. Then she turned and looked at her car. "Well, I'd better get back to work, otherwise it might be 4 a.m. before I get to go home." "Yeah, I'd better get this stuff in before Hunter blows a gasket." He watched her get in the car, and then he stood holding the door and the food. "Drive carefully." Why was it so hard to just say goodbye? Don't let Hunter get to you. "I'll try not to," he said with a laugh. "I'll see you." "Yeah," he said, and very carefully he shut her door. She started the car, waiting for him to slide out of the space between hers and the Trailblazer. However, when she backed out, he was still standing right at the edge of the car's path, those white bags dangling from his hands next to his knees. Offhandedly, she waved as her body traced down everything it liked about how he looked. Those pants curved in all the right places, the jacket draped over those arms that she couldn't get out of her head. And that smile, lopsided and completely amazing. He waved. She did too, kind of. When she got to the street, she looked back. He hadn't moved, and somehow it was like she was destined to be watching him in that rearview mirror forever. The next morning, Lisa was still on his mind as Jeff went to his locker to grab his coat at 6:30, fully prepared to head out with the rest of the guys. However, Hunter had other ideas. How he accomplished hanging a whole open bag of flour from the locker door without getting it everywhere in the process, Jeff would never know. But the second he opened the locker, the bag ripped and white powder spilled out, hitting the ground at his shoes and creating a cloud that drifted all the way up his clothes. With 2 coughs, he waved at the now white air surrounding him as he looked through it to his clothes. Snickers and giggles erupted from the far side of the lockers. "Nice," Jeff said with a reluctant smile as Dante and Hunter peered around the end of the gray metal, fighting back the laughter. "Very nice." "Have fun cleaning that up. I'd hate for the chief to happen by and see it," Hunter said, and he turned Dante toward the door. A tired sigh escaped as Jeff looked down at the white lava flow still cascading from the locker onto his shoes. Carefully, he picked one shoe up and then the other, and he walked over to the sink, knowing he was leaving a lovely white shoe trail behind him. "Crud, Witkowski bailed on me," a short, middle-aged fireman said, coming into the room as Jeff pulled the trash can over to begin the cleanup. "What am I going to tell Pat?" "What's the big deal?" The man's colleague, a tall, brownish-blonde, goateed man about half a decade older than Jeff, said in a deep voice that resonated off the concrete walls. "I'm sure she'll understand." However, they stopped in mid-conversation when they turned at the lockers and saw Jeff scooping the flour from the floor and transferring it into the trash can. "Problems?" "You could say that," Jeff said, wishing his voice sounded happier about the mess. The goateed man shook his head in sympathy and turned back to the conversation. "Pat's cool. I'm sure she'll understand." "Understand what? That I'm going to miss her birthday again? Like I missed Valentine's Day and Jenny's spring play and our anniversary before that? Yeah, I'm sure she'll understand." The shorter man shook his mostly hairless head. "I just wish I could find somebody else to cover for me on Tuesday. At least it would stave off a divorce for another couple months." Jeff was listening as he cleaned, and although they would know he was eavesdropping, he straightened and cleared his throat. "I could probably come in on Tuesday if you needed someone." The older man's attention snapped to Jeff. At first, his gaze was hard and cold. Then it softened slightly. "I haven't seen you around. You new?" "Yeah, I just started last week," Jeff said, nodding. The fact that he was still standing in a mound of white flour seemed to escape from his consciousness. "But I'm not busy Tuesday, if you need somebody." "What's your shift?" the man asked, with worry around the edges of the question. "Oh, no, it's okay. You don't have to switch or anything. It's no big deal. I don't mind covering for you." "You sure?" "Yeah. I work Sunday anyway, so Tuesday won't kill me." The man stood for a moment and then smiled and stuck his hand out. "Wade Frazier." "Jeff Taylor." He brushed his hand off on his pants, which did no good, and shook first one man's hand and then the other. "Gabe Teague," the goateed man said. "So you'll really do this?" Wade asked, rocking backward on the thought. "Yeah, no problem." Wade smiled mischievously. "Pat may kiss you." The tips of Jeff's ears went hot as he shrugged and bent down to the mess. "Just glad I could help." When Lisa's gaze chanced on the clock on her computer at 3:55 on Sunday morning, she almost laughed, and had she not been so tired, she would have. It had taken all of Saturday and most of the night to go through Kurt's idea of a ready presentation piece by piece and get it acceptable for Monday's meeting. Why was it that she had hired him again? She couldn't clearly remember anymore. In fact, as her mouse clicked across the screen, anything other than utter exhaustion was getting very little play in her brain. However, every 30 seconds or so, her gaze would slip down to that little clock in the corner as her dreams slipped to him. Her chin rested in her hand as thoughts of him drifted through her. He had said something about Sunday. Was he off on Sunday, or was that when he went back? She shook her head to clear it of him. However, seconds later he was there again, crowding through her work like a bulldozer. It was because she was so tired, she told herself. Her willpower, along with her energy, was shot. The mouse slowed as it clicked across her screen. 3:59 glowed back from the ether. Where was he now? At the station? At home in bed, asleep? On a call? In the fuzz of sleep invading her brain, she hoped it was one of the former and not the later. She was going to have to find out more about his schedule, she thought as the haze finally took over, and she laid her head on the desk. She really was going to have to find out more about him. This has been To Protect and Serve, Volume 1 of the Courage series. Written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings. This has been a Braveheart Audiobooks production.
Never miss a second of the story. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel today.